Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, sound. Committee Room 30, sound. Committee Room 30, sound. Committee Room 30, sound.
Okay, good afternoon members, and welcome to this afternoon's sitting of the Education Committee. Cover housekeeping first and then we'll get into the agenda. So I would advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And I'd advise those in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they are in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. And I would remind that it's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. So that takes us to item 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. I have apologies from John, and just to note that Cara is joining online. So again, any connection issues, do just flag that through the clerk. Any other apologies? We have apologies for lateness, sorry, from Peter. I think everybody else is here. So item 2 then is chairperson's business, of which there's none today. So I'll move straight on to item 3, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations that they wish to make in relation to any items on today's agenda? No, that's a change as usual, indicate, so that can be recorded. Item 4 is matters arising. Again, none to reference there, so that then takes us on to item 5, which is draft minutes. So I'd refer members to the draft minutes of the Education Committee meeting of the 11th of March, and that's at page 8 of your packs. Can I get agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings? Is that agreed? Thank you. Okay, so that is us on to item 6, and this is our first oral briefing from today's session, and it's a briefing in relation to effective school leadership in schools situated in disadvantaged communities. I would refer members, just while the witnesses are coming through, to a briefing note from the clerk at page 15 of your packs. A briefing paper and witness biographies at page 17 of your packs, and then we have the report itself, which is at page 21 of your packs, and that's the report entitled Effective School Leadership in Disadvantaged Schools. And then at page 99 we also have an assembly research briefing which was commissioned by the committee, further to a stakeholder engagement on its strategic priority of educational underachievement. You may want to refer to that if it relates to anything you wish to ask some questions on. So good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. So I'll do initial intros, but as usual with the caveat, if I get job titles wrong or anything is incorrect, feel free to correct me. It's definitely been known. So joining us today, we're very glad to have Professor Noel Purdy with us, Director of the Centre for Research in Educational Underachievement at Stranmillis University College. We have Amelia Symington, researcher at Stranmillis University College. We have Katrina Moore, retired principal at Malone Integrated College. And we have Padraig O'Meanan, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, retired principal at St Bridget's College. So you're all very, very welcome, and we look forward to your input today. This does feed into one of the committee's key themes for this mandate around tackling educational disadvantage and underachievement. So we are really looking forward to hearing this specific angle today around the role of effective leadership in delivering that. So I don't think there's a need for any more preamble. I'm happy to hand over to yourselves for any initial opening presentation or remarks, up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move into question and answer. Will it be yourself, Noel, kicking off?
And Millie.
Okay, yeah. That's great. I'll hand over to yourselves.
Thank you, Chair, Deputy Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to brief you today and for your interest in our research. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share some of the key findings from this report entitled Effective School Leadership in Disadvantaged Communities that was funded by the James Cain Foundation and the Mary Ann McCracken Foundation. It was published in September. It was launched in November at an event in Clifton House, North Belfast. The study set out to explore a straightforward but important question: what does effective school leadership look like in post-primary schools serving highly disadvantaged communities in Northern Ireland? And more specifically, the research had 3 objectives. First of all, to identify the key characteristics of 13 high-performing post-primary schools where more than 50% of pupils were entitled to free school meals. To explore the motivation, values, support structures and professional characteristics of the principals leading these schools, and I'm delighted to say we've got 2 of the 13 principals with us this afternoon, and to draw lessons for new and aspiring leaders who may wish to work in similarly challenging contexts. The broader aim was not simply to celebrate success, but to understand what leadership practices appear to make a difference in schools facing significant socioeconomic disadvantage. The study focused on 13 post-primary schools that met the 2 criteria. First of all, they had to have more than 50% free school meal entitlement, indicating significant socioeconomic disadvantage, and then academic performance at least 5 percentage points above the Northern Ireland trend line for GCSEs achieving 5 or more, or for pupils achieving 5 or more GCSEs at grades A to C, A star to C, including English and Maths. The schools were identified using DE data from the 2018-2019 academic year, the last full year before the disruption of COVID-19, and that was the data that was published in the independent report, the Independent Review of Education's final report as well. The research had 2 strands. First, we conducted a quantitative analysis of available school data, examining characteristics such as attendance, SEN levels, suspension rates, levels of deprivation, and so on. But second, and more interestingly, we conducted an in-depth, semi-structured interview with each of the 13 principals in the 13 schools. These were individual interviews, and they took place between January and May of 2025, and explored 5 themes: leadership vision, strategies for driving success, relationships with communities, personal and professional values, and perspectives on the future of leadership in disadvantaged schools. Before turning to the leadership findings that Millie is going to take us through, one important point emerged from the statistical analysis. Although these schools all share high levels of disadvantage, they are not homogeneous, they're not the same. There were significant variations in areas such as the levels of SEN, ethnic diversity, suspension rates, local deprivation profiles, size, management structure, many other features as well. In other words, demographic factors alone cannot explain their success. This reinforces an important message for policy and policy makers. There is no single one-size-fits-all model for schools serving disadvantaged communities. Context does matter. From the interviews then with the principals, 5 recurring themes emerged, and together they offer a picture of leadership that is purpose-driven, relational, and deeply rooted in community context. And Millie is going to take us through those 5 now.
Thank you. The first theme was clarity of vision. All of the principals spoke about the importance of articulating and sustaining a clear direction for the school. This vision was not something that sat in a policy document. It was reinforced constantly through staff meetings, everyday interactions, and leadership decisions. It served as both a strategic compass and a way of creating shared purpose among staff and pupils. In schools facing multiple challenges, that clarity of purpose appeared to be critical. The second theme was an unwavering commitment to championing pupils. Principals were clear that raising attainment still remains central. Many spoke about strong systems for tracking progress, monitoring attendance, and using data to guide interventions. But they also emphasised that data must never replace understanding the child behind the data. Leaders consistently described trying to balance academic expectations with deep pastoral awareness, recognising the complex circumstances many pupils face. The message from these principals was simple but powerful. Every decision should begin with what is best for the child. The third theme was connection. Relationships were central to leadership effectiveness. Principals described investing significant time in building strong relationships with pupils, supporting and developing staff, engaging with parents, and strengthening links with the local community. Many leaders emphasised the importance of being visible and accessible within the school. Others highlighted the value of staff who understand the local community or who were formal pupils of the school. These relational practices reflect what research internationally describes as contextual literacy, leaders understanding the communities they serve and working as part of them, rather than being apart from them. The fourth theme relates to personal character and values. While professional expertise matter, principals repeatedly spoke about qualities such as humility, resilience, integrity, compassion, and a willingness to listen. Several principals also described the role of personal faith or moral purpose in sustaining them in demanding roles. Regardless of religious background, there was a strong sense that leadership in these contexts is fundamentally values-driven and mission-oriented. The final theme concerns the future of leadership. Principals were very conscious of the demands and pressures of the role, particularly in disadvantaged settings. Many expressed concern about the pipeline of future leaders. They highlighted the need for stronger preparation for teachers entering disadvantaged schools, mentoring and support for early career teachers, structured leadership development pathways, and better mechanisms for sharing the experience of serving principals with the next generation of leaders. In short, there was a strong message that leadership capacity must be intentionally developed if these successes are to be sustained. To conclude, this research highlights a model of leadership grounded in purpose, compassion, and connection. The principals involved in this study are leading schools that are raising attainment, supporting people well-being, building aspiration, and serving communities facing significant social and economic challenges. Their experiences reinforce the importance of investing in leadership development, supporting mentoring and succession planning, and recognising the diverse contexts in which disadvantaged schools operate. Above all, the findings remind us that effective leadership can make a profound difference, even in the most challenging circumstances.
So thank you again to the committee for your interest in our work, and we would all now be happy to answer any questions you might have on this particular important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the initial presentation. And I think as well, I think it's particularly important to know it's great to have two, retired principals. Very, very recently retired. It would not have been suspected otherwise on the panel, because I think actually that real world insight is something we don't always get at committee. I think the teachers and school leaders are sometimes nervous to be seen to put their head above the parapet. When they're in the system. So it is really good to have that input from yourself today. I noted in the report itself that the issue of a managing authority and the role of a managing authority did come up, and to what extent it actually feeds into improving standards in school and supporting school leaders to deliver the kind of work that you're setting out. The Minister has identified specific issue around educational disadvantage or underachievement potentially in the controlled sector, and is very much looking at a managing authority for that sector. And I want to be really clear, no interest in drawing people into the politics if that's not the purpose of my question, but it's to get a sense of to what extent the role of a managing authority was felt to be important as an intervention for school leaders, or if there are other things that perhaps have more of an impact. So I don't know whether from the research perspective or from the principal's experience, if there's any views on that.
Start, and then I will definitely hand over to the principals in this one as well, representing two different sectors. We were very conscious of that. So of the 13 schools, once we found out from the department who the 13 schools were, we were very conscious that there was one controlled school, one Irish medium, 2 integrated, and 9 Catholic maintained schools. And that in itself, I think, is interesting. We were interested to see that. So these high-performing schools in disadvantaged areas, the high-performing ones were mostly from one particular sector rather than another. And there are complex reasons for that. And we were interested, and we asked the principals about that whenever we were speaking to them as well. And I remember asking one principal in a maintained school and saying, you're aware of the breakdown here. What is it that you're doing that's different from what's going on in the controlled school down the road? And the principals we asked that to weren't really able to answer that, because they were saying, well, we have a very strong pastoral ethos in our school, but so does the controlled school, 100 yards away or half a mile down the road. So they couldn't really put their finger on it, to be honest. One or two principals within the maintained sector did talk about the I suppose the Catholic ethos, the community spirit, and the strong links with the community. But I know there are plenty of schools across all the sectors in Northern Ireland that would equally value the community links that they have, and I know Katrina from the integrated sector would echo that as well. So there was nothing conclusive in the interviews that we had that explained that conclusively, I suppose. But I'll pass over to Katrina and Padraig now.
Thanks. I think, in my perspective, having taught in both maintained, controlled and integrated schools, I personally could see a very massive difference when I moved into the integrated sector, because we were a GMI school, a grant maintained, so we were very much didn't have an overall employing authority, shall we say. So a lot of our decisions were very much and regulations were very much based on the governance and our roles within what our ethos was of the school, and pushing that forward at all times. I do think sometimes within the control sector there might be a little bit more of a a control, if that makes sense, in terms of what can and cannot be done. But I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, the pastoral ethos of all the schools is so similar. There's very, very little difference, but I think it's just in how they are maybe managed and who's perhaps on governors. Maybe governance is a massive issue that needs to be looked at more carefully. That's just my own opinion anyway. Padraig?
I find, from my opinion, CCMS is very, very supportive. However, you know, they're come under a lot of burden, a lot of hassle, and that they haven't got the funding now neither. You know, so the support that was there isn't there as much now. But their support, look, it has been valuable, and it is very valuable, you know, for when you're talking about the Catholic ethos, right? But that underpins everything. But the Catholic ethos can work in anywhere, any school. You know, it's you respect, courtesy, it's setting high expectations. It's not a Catholic thing, you know, but it's something that's ingrained in us and ingrained in the Catholic sector, you know, about, you know, working and doing the best for the most disadvantaged.
And again, whoever wants to take it on the panel, I mean, I'm not completely clear, maybe not completely nailed down sort of the costs of establishing a new managing authority, but memory would tell me somewhere in the region of £1 million. If there was £1 million to be invested into supporting school leaders to do this work, would that make a tangible difference across all sectors? Is that sort of funding to free school leaders up to do this work? Would that be a helpful intervention?
It would very much depend on what the support looked like and really was made up of. And it's not just about, I mean, okay, there's leadership at a principal level in the school, but the leadership begins the minute and the hour that you walk into that school as a teacher. And, you know, you have to buy into that form of leadership. There is no, I mean, I'm showing my age now, but going back to the old RTU days, whenever the regional training unit used to, you know, you used to be training for middle leaders, senior leaders, and it was brilliant. I had, you know, cut my teeth really in that, and some of the training was fabulous. At the minute, that's non-existent, and any training that you get, you have to go and look for and, you know, access yourself. And a lot of it is not necessarily Northern Ireland education training, shall we say. It can be very, you know, it's not bespoke, and that's an issue. And I know myself from doing some training with NICE and IEF, you know, we would have done an awful lot of work on developing leadership and, you know, professional development pathways. And I have to say this, I do worry that, don't worry, no, it's okay. I don't know if the present headship qualifications are really of much benefit to leaders. So I would worry that people would just think, and staff and schools would just think, if they're going to be the £1 million put into leadership, is it going to be that qualification under a new heading? That needs to be, in my own personal opinion, chucked out and started all over again, because each of our schools is very different in terms of management and things that we have to do on a day-to-day basis. You know, so there has to be a little bit more bespoke for that. But overall, no, it's a tough one, and I think there's been so much change in education recently. If suddenly we're going to put something else on, we're going to have a riot in the nicest possible way.
Well, that maybe leads me on to my next question. I suppose on managing authorities, I'll maybe summarise. Jury's out really in terms of that. I mean, that maybe, and that seemed to come through in the report as well in terms of that you know, the role or otherwise of that. I'll quote from your report. You've stated leadership capacity must be intentionally developed if success is to be maintained. So it's leadership. Leadership is the key here, and there's really clear principles as were set out in your presentation around what that looks like and the features of good leadership in these contexts. But you've referenced if there's more change that comes down the track, that there's likely to be a riot, those are your words. So I mean, the workload context, the industrial relations context is really, really challenging. So are there things that need to be done in terms of workload pressures to allow principals to do the leadership work? Because the feedback I hear is it's pure.
I mean, we're not in it. If you're in it looking for status and look at me, I'm doing it. You're the wrong job, right? This is about relationships. See, in a disadvantaged school, that's it. The main thing is relationships. If you get the relationships right, everything else comes. See all these high expectations. That's what we go for, high expectations. But that's getting to know the kids when they come through that door, that's the difference. If you make them happy, the academic attainment will come.
With the pressures around finances, bureaucracy, all of the new initiatives that come through, do you have time? Do principals feel they have the time to invest in relationships?
You have to. Do you see in our schools?
You have to.
See in a disadvantaged school, if you don't invest in relationships, then the school will fail. I'm telling you that now, the school will fail. But so you have to manage it. The difference is, rather than being stuck in your office, trying to deal with all the bureaucracy and all the fighting, you're out in the corridors, you change your class, out at the beginning when they're coming into school, out in the street, or up in the shopping centre when they're going home. And it's getting to know them, so then you can relate to them. You can talk to them.
Those parents as well comes through in the report. The parental relationships are really important.
They're vital.
Yeah.
And we heard that, I must say, we heard that not just from these two amazing principals, but across all 13 principals as well. And we went into these schools, met the principals face to face, had lengthy conversations with them, and then often went on a tour of the school as well. And it was really interesting to see how these principals, they weren't strangers in the corridors. They knew the pupils, they knew the staff, the pupils knew them as well. They were having conversations. Sometimes it was quite hard to get away from those schools because the tour went on, but it was incredible to see that. And so just to echo what Padraig said, and it's not, and we said this in the report as well, it's not that these principals were undervaluing the importance of high quality education or results or attainment. They were very much saying that is the hallmark of a good school, has to have high attainment. It's your bread and butter. But it was always balanced by an emphasis on relationships and the pastoral well-being and the championing, I think is the word that we've used here, of children. And that was very palpable. These were not isolated, remote principals sitting in an ivory tower. They were out there in the corridors, in the playgrounds, in the dining hall, and the pupils knew them, and we could see that, and it was very impressive. And not every school principal in Northern Ireland, as you'll know, is like that. But in disadvantaged schools, as Padraig said, it would appear to be their bread and butter. It appeared to be their way of working and the only way to work.
When you're in school and when the kids are there, you are front facing with those kids all the time. Your bureaucracy and everything else comes before school starts and after school's over. And I would put my hand on my heart, and I know that I did not always focus as much on learning and teaching, because I spent more time making sure that the relationships are right, and not just relationships with the pupils, but also relationships with staff and between staff and pupils. And the old adage, and I said it every week without fail, if you can't stand in front of a child in your room and take that child as your 14 or 15-year-old self, or take that child as your own child and teach them and speak to them and treat them the way you would like you or your child to be treated, you are in the wrong job. And that to me is about the old adage of the 3 R's, and it's not my spelling, the reading, writing, arithmetic, that's gone. It's relationship, because that's what brings everything else in, and everything will follow after that. Very, very much so, it will follow after that.
That's great. Look, I'm going to bring the Deputy Chair in. I maybe a wee bit on workload I would like to come back to, but I am conscious of time. So, Deputy Chair, bring in then any other indications.
Thanks, Chair. And I suppose, I remember Bob Salisbury giving evidence to the committee a while back, and he said that leadership was the single most important factor in any successful school. And I've seen it myself, and where a school has been failing, a new principal has come in and turned it around, and the principal who had been in that school moves on to a bigger school, and God knows what happens there. In terms of the failure in the original school, there was financially nearly £1 million in the red. Educational outcomes were on the floor. And so on, yet someone comes in and turns that around. Just one single individual, and I've been in a couple of schools over the last few weeks, both in disadvantaged areas. One of them was Collister, another was Craigavon Integrated College. both large schools with large percentages of children on free school meals. And it was one of the things that struck me as we were doing tours of those schools, the interaction between the principal and the young people. Because I remember when I was at school, if you saw the principal coming along the corridor, you'd have turned on your heel and got out of the road because you never knew what was going to happen. But, you know, and your research is clear that there's no one size fits all. Outcomes are driven by leadership, relationships, context, and so on, rather than any one single structural factor. Is that a fair characterisation of your research?
I think that is a fair characterisation of the research, and I should say, you mentioned Bob Salisbury. He was on our advisory group for this project as well, and was really helpful, both Bob and his wife Rosemary, in terms of shaping some of the questions and the strategy that we adopted as part of this study. So his influence hasn't left us entirely. But so he did very much stress that leadership is key, and I suppose this all goes back even several years, Pat, to whenever I was involved in the Fair Start work, where we met a number of absolutely inspirational principals at that time, and you could see even after, and in those days during COVID, a lot of the meetings were online, so we didn't have the opportunity to go into schools and see them in action in the corridors, but we were hugely impressed by their passion and their drive and their commitment. And I do think, and we can all think of examples where one particular principal has turned around a school. The context was the same, the funding was the same, the staff were largely the same, but it's the principal and their dynamic visionary leadership that has turned the place around. And there are examples of that all over Northern Ireland. So I do think leadership is key, but to go back to your point and our conclusions, it's not just leadership as well. So clearly there has to be a focus on teaching and learning, the relationships, the data and the mapping of data, which was very strong, that coming through as well.
Which adds to workload. No, it's. Look, I'm cutting across here just, because Pat, you see leadership and a new principal coming in, a new change and all. I don't just buy into that totally. All right, I'm maybe a bit different here. It's a collective. It's a staff. The staff are always there, as well. I mean, it's them as they work together. So it's not just me or Katrina. It's us working together to get the things done.
Well, it's like any situation. I mean, if the leader can't bring the rest of the troops with him or her, then they're not going to be successful. It turns out to be a collective effort, but there needs to be that leadership there to begin with, and I suppose that's the point I'm making. I just wanted to touch briefly on the point that Nick brought up around the managing authority for the control sector, because you'll be aware the Minister wants to set up a new managing authority for the controlled sector, and his argument is that this will improve outcomes in the controlled sector, because if you look at the Catholic maintained sector, the outcomes are much better in that sector, and therefore if the controlled sector had their own managing authority, then outcomes would also rise there. Now, I've asked the Minister for some empirical evidence to support that hypothesis, and he has directed me towards the consultation. As far as I'm concerned, that's not evidence. That's opinion from teachers, principals and so on who work in the controlled sector. So is there a risk of confusion, correlation with causation when comparing outcomes across sectors?
Well, it's a complex question, and whether the controlled schools unit within the Education Authority is going to solve all the challenges that the controlled sector faces, it's impossible to say that. But there is a suggestion that in the decade or 20 years since CCMS was established, that sector has benefited from the leadership, and albeit that they might be short of staff at the minute and under pressure like everybody else at the moment, but there is evidence that CCMS has really driven forward, very dynamically and courageously, a lot of reforms within the maintained sector. the opinion in the control sector is that because the Education Authority always had that dual role, was that their needs weren't being championed quite as much in that sector. Whether that translates into, you know, empirical differences in attainment rates in controlled schools in the years to come, Pat, we'll have to wait and see that. But certainly I'm aware of those arguments. We've heard those arguments for several years now, and we'll just have to wait and see. I don't know if colleagues wish to comment.
I mean, I can't speak for the controlled sector per se, but you know, it's good having somebody in the other line, you know, to ring up for support, particularly when it comes to, you know, staffing issues. You know, you've got someone there and it's the same person, and you build that relationship up. The problem with the EA is you ring them up one week and they get to know the thing, then you ring them up again and then they've moved and there's somebody else. You know, it's stuff like that. You know, so it's maybe if it's not setting up another, you know, committee, it's having the right people in place in the EA.
Yeah. Well, let me put a sort of alternative to you. And it sort of came up in Lucy Crehan's book. I'm sure you've read it. And she talked, I think it was the Canadian model, where schools needed an extra bit of support. There was a group of maybe retired teachers, principals, who came in, not as, you know, to shame the school, or not like the old way of the inspections here, you know, you were sort of named and shamed. But a group of successful former teachers or principals who come in and provided that support. That would certainly be an alternative to a managing authority, wouldn't it?
There's your RTU. I know it was supposed to be the regional training unit, but it was just underhandly known as the retired teachers unit. So I mean, and it worked.
Yeah.
You know, the proof was in the pudding. It worked.
They've got the experience. I agree totally.
Yeah.
You, Pat, that the wealth of experience from retired principals, or existing principals to help out and support. You know, it's vital and it's untapped.
Yeah.
And they know what they're talking about, and the complexities of the role, because you have to be, you've got 20 different jobs to do at the one time, you know. So that I think that's vital. Yeah. No, going forward, because if we're talking about training and leadership training, it's using that pool of past principals, existing principals, that experience, and drawing it in, you know. And I think that's a vital way forward.
Okay, and Chair, if you'll just indulge me for a second. on another issue, Lucy Crehan, as you probably know, was in with us last week, and she carried out the curriculum review. But her remit didn't include looking at the primary curriculum and particularly the transfer test. But she accepted here last week that teaching to the transfer test distorts and skews the curriculum in primary schools. So given that there's, you know, a whole reform of the curriculum taking place at the minute, and I don't even want to get into a discussion around, you know, the curriculum, what is it, curriculum rich, or knowledge rich curriculum. But in terms of, if we're going to have curriculum for nursery, primary and post-primary, there needs to be some sort of continuity. Because if kids are being taught to an exam in primary school
here, Pat.
and they're falling behind there, then how do they make it up when they move into post-primary school if they're already, you know, branded as failures?
Yeah,
they come to amazing schools with people who lead well and bring the kids on and get them through and fight tooth and nail for them.
But they come into our school and they get no self-esteem because they're told they're failures. It's a disgrace.
Yeah.
A two-tier system where people get all the money, all the resources. You look at the disadvantaged schools. I mean, we're in a school now, it's 50 years old, and the building's 50 years old. And they just say, is that because we're from Galia and we're from Shantala? Whereas the school up the road on either side of us, no, they got new schools. And you try to explain to them, no. And they go, it looks that way.
Have to draw a line there, but perhaps other members will want to pick up. Michelle, you were next.
Thank you. I have been a fan of this research. I got to credit my researcher for finding it, and we've been a real fan of this work. So it's really wonderful to have you here to speak to it. I want to start off with the curriculum. We've had conversations recently and last week indeed about the new curriculums coming through, and I'm really concerned, or maybe you're going to reassure me, that we're not going to lose anything of what you guys are telling us is a success factor, the flexibility. I mean, one of the quotes was, we change our curriculum offer every year because every year group will be different. How are you feeling about the changes that are coming through, and are you confident that what you bring will not be lost when that new curriculum and new style of leadership comes in?
I'm nervous.
I'd say
Very
no,
nervous about
not
it.
confident,
No.
worried. You know, we DE come in and speak to us on the Foyle Learning Committee last year about, you know, the changes and what you should do and what you should have. And one of the big ones we said, you see, assessment and portfolio work and controlled assessments like that needs to stay. That needs to stay because our kids do so much better there than they do in examination. And that even came from the grammar school body as well, right? And then we're told now that we're moving away from that. And the reason we're moving away from that is because of workload. That's you can't tie the two together there. That's trying to say that we'll get rid of it. We're listening to you, it's workload. That's not. You provide the time for teachers. You provide that time. Whether that, we need to invest a hell of a lot of money into this, so no one wants to hear that. But you put the time in and you turn around and say, right, see, every 2 weeks, you have a full day off, and that full day is where you're doing your whatever work you need to be doing out of the class. In the school, you're sitting there. I'm just saying that's easy for me to say. But that's what they need. The workload is killing education. See, administration, the marking, everything else coming on top. These are members of staff, right, that, you know, are working in disadvantaged schools. So many problems. The kids, trying to motivate the kids, the disaffected kids, bringing them round, cajoling them, and then having to get the GCSEs and the A-levels as well out of them, you know, because if we don't have the results, then we're failing school. Doesn't matter how well we get on with them and how they might leave really happy. It all goes down to GCSE and A-level results. You know, so that's a big fear of mine. I do like what they're saying about, you know, maybe more with getting industry involved, and then you know, work experience and getting out in placements. I work with GEMEX and Derry, generating manufacturing, education, excellence, right? It's a collective of organisations, and they're saying to me, you know, the schools are going, we don't care about GCSEs, we care about the skills. See, when they leave your school, they need to have these skills, so they do. And they don't even know what jobs we can provide. So why don't you take them out, take them over and visit us? And I'm going, happy days. But then they're saying I'm going, but the thing is, I've got to get GCSEs out of them. Mm-hmm. So they have to be in school to do this. I go, you need to change the education, you need to change the curriculum, make sure that's part of it, so that they can go out.
You've answered the next question I was going to ask. I'm going to throw it in now, and you can answer it all together as well. And it was about the kind of vocational technical pathways and how important. I don't feel like that is something that actually is what we're hearing, or there has been much of that done recently. It feels like its focus has moved to academic, and these vocational pathways, etc., are not really forming part of this kind of new era agenda. Please speak to both questions. I'll let you guys do all the talking here. We're here listening.
If you look at the labour market stats and what the you know, what the thoughts are going to be, you know, when I was at school and going through school, you went into maybe one, you maybe had a second career change. Now they reckon that young people are going to maybe have 4 or 5 different career changes before the age of 40. We got to make those young people ready for that. So I totally agree that the curriculum has to change and has to have depth. But I really do think that there has to be more realistic career inputs into the curriculum than there is at the minute. And you know, there's no point, this sounds awful, teaching children about, I'm a geographer, so teaching children about river erosion, yes, I get that. But really, what's the next thing? They need to look about renewable technologies. There needs to be more of that kind of stuff being brought in, and that's what's crucial. So, you know, I was joking with Padraig earlier. I can remember back in the 80s when they did, when they told when they changed the curriculum then, and I remember going to a meeting where a gentleman was there who had developed the geography curriculum at the time, and he was from the Royal Society of Protection of Birds. And I thought, okay, why? So, you know, I'm curious to see what is going to be involved in it. What does worry me about it is the pace of it. It almost feels like it's been a done to us as a done with us. And
consultation for consultation's sake. You know, we consulted. We're not
Yeah.
listening, but we've consulted. That's our worry. That's a fear.
I would never do that.
I'm not here. I'm just speaking for. What I would
Just bring Michelle in just for a brief final question or comment.
Okay. I'll just ask it loosely. You've mentioned data, and it's in the report here, and how you use data. I think you kind of were going to speak to it there anyway. So I'd like to understand a bit more about how you're actually capturing data and then using it in a way that's tailored and helps to each child fulfill their. Because I will worry again that we're moving to, or some of the in education, it's about capturing data, and then we show like SEM placements. We've increased the placements. Yay, thumbs up, that data shows an improvement. But if you look at the child, they're not getting the right placement, the educational outcomes aren't there. So it's about how do you then capture the right data that then is leading to the right outcomes for the child.
Yeah, it's not just the qualitative, it's the quantitative data. It's the knowing the children and knowing absolutely everything about those children, where they're coming from, where their background, medical, everything has to be known, and that has to be part of that data. And it can't just be a literacy, numeracy level. It just can't be that. It has to be the whole child. And, you get to know those children, but you have to get to know those children. And that's why we're saying we do change our curriculum every year, because we know what those young people, we know from day one what are you interested in, what would you be good at, because you're having those conversations with those children. And you're having the conversation with the parents, and you're meeting the parents. You're going out and even meeting those kids when they're in the primary schools and talking to their primary school teachers. So you're getting all this really, really, really rich data, and you're moving that right the way through. And that's what's crucial with this. And it's not just about, well, how many A stars to C did you get? And it's not just about, I would have had young people who'd maybe come to me, as you had said, maybe feeling that they were a failure at primary school because they didn't maybe do a transfer or whatever, or they achieved X, Y, or Z. Maybe reading ages 6, 7, 8-year-olds. And when those children are standing in front of you in August after their 5th year, and they're coming out with 5 or more A star to C, no data's going to tell you. That is what's so special. That's what makes
it's that value added.
Very
Once they come
briefly,
in,
Patrick, I'll have to just draw a line on this.
just once they come in or once they leave. But it's the pastoral data is what you use. It's vital rather than the academic. The academic tells you that they're not doing well, but with the pastoral data, right, we got to watch out for Michael here, because there's a chance this is going to happen or that's going to happen. So let's make sure we adapt things for him before the data tells us that he's a failure or something,
No one want to say so?
Just very quickly, and just to say that there are some jurisdictions that have system-wide wellbeing data.
Yeah.
So the state of Victoria in Australia is a good example. So based around Melbourne there, where there's compulsory, and so it's mandatory for all pupils at certain times through their school career to complete. I suppose it's a bit like the GL pass, but it's state sponsored. So schools are not paying for it individually. This comes out of the department budget, and it allows at a system level to see, I suppose, where are the trends in well-being? What are the issues that need to be addressed on a system level? And it's very rare, so I'm saying one state in Australia has that. We don't have that. There's no jurisdiction in the UK or Ireland that does that. But I'm just saying it is possible to do. And actually schools are already paying their own, out of their own budget for GL pass assessments, which do look at pupil attitudes and so on. So it can be done. And perhaps we should be looking at a broader measure of what achievement actually is.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. Apologies.
No, you're grand. Look, always a challenge when we've got expertise and passion on a panel. That it's difficult sometimes to manage the time, because I want to make sure witnesses are getting the chance to answer questions fully. So I'll try and give a wee bit of leeway. Cara, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much to the panel. You can tell your passion even through the screen. I just want to touch a bit on workload and burnout. I saw on page 24 you mentioned it says you will burn out eventually, and that makes me terribly sad, because speaking with our principals, we know how much effort and energy that they put into the jobs that they love, and it sounds like they're just essentially managing exhaustion. is really what I'm picking up. I recently spoke with a principal in my constituency who said so much of his time is strictly spent on things like human resources, so HR issues, being GDPR compliant and all the backroom stuff. And he said, I just want to be engaging and supporting my pupils for as much as I possibly can. So I'm just wondering, what more do you think we can do to support our principals and to help them be the best they can be? And some of that bureaucracy aspect of things, what can we do to support our principals?
Yeah.
I think in my perspective, I think it's very important that it's nearly like you have a previous principal or an existing principal who is literally there as your right hand, as your support network, as your trusted colleague, your critical friend. I find that really beneficial. It is exhausting. You are spending your time, dealing with a lot of bureaucracy. We get into this job to teach young people because we wanted to spend time and to help young people. Not to be filling in paperwork and fighting arguments and completing freedom of information requests and all that kind of stuff. So I do think that it's very important that we have support networks out there for the principals, because it is a very lonely job. And there's times when, there's times I have driven to school and think, will they find out today that I haven't a clue what I'm doing? Will they realise that I don't know what I'm doing? Will they realise that I'm just pretending? So you do have that negativity and you don't have that support. And yes, there are school improvement officers attached from the Education Authority, etc. It's not the same, because they might have 5 or 6 and they're looking at the overall school improvement. They're not just looking at the leader or leaders within that school and what support is there for them. I did a session a couple of weeks ago for NICE with looking at vice principals, and the theme of it was you're one day away from being a principal. And I did just a session and said, look, here's an average week, here's a scenario of an average week, here's what you need to know. I think I scared the living daylights out of most of them, and I don't know if none of them are going to want to be in anymore, but it was just a real thing. And then as the day went on and we talked about it, we discussed and we did scenarios and group work, it was suddenly, this is what we're doing every day. And there are little tweaks and little things you can do, but you don't know what you don't know until you're told. And you need somebody there to support you. That's just my...
And there's far too much bureaucracy. There's far too many. There's 50,000 bloody emails from DE or EA nearly every day. And then if you miss one of them, don't answer it. And then a month down the line, then they go, oh, but you didn't answer it. You've now lost out on this and that. You go, for God's sake. But you look at the number of people who apply for principals' roles now.
Oh, yeah.
Compared to vice principals even. The pool is very, very small, all right? Nobody wants to have that, burden. You say it's very lonely. It is. It's very, very rewarding, and it's great. It's great when you know your school and you love your wains, and that's what it's about. It's not about you. But I mean, those first 2 years, me being a principal, it was imposter syndrome. I go, what am I doing here? How have I got this job? Until, do you know what it was? It was a local, one of the monks to come into the school priest. He goes, get over it. That's not you're put the job. That's what you've got to do it. And that's what it's about. You do it. It is lonely. It's very, very rewarding. But you see, what would help us? Again, it's down to money. It's putting an investment, maybe be able to, right, okay, so we'll have another VP, we'll have another senior, where they can do these certain roles that free me up to be able to work with the kids more or do this or that. That's the type of... It all comes down to money. You throw money, you were here saying about maybe raise or things like that. You give us the money, we'll do it. Yeah. Like the TSN fund.
Yeah.
The money comes in.
Yeah.
We can do what we want with it. No, as in we justify what we're doing. It makes a big, massive difference. Yeah. We don't have to go through 50 million hurdles. With all this different bureaucracy. We can turn around and say, you know what? We're employing more teachers because we're bringing down the pupil-teacher ratio. We can't have class sizes of 25. All go mad. We bring it down, so we do. We invest so much money into it. We can invest extra money into breakfast clubs in the morning, making sure they're coming in, making sure they're getting fed before they go out to class. Investing money into special needs, our coordinators. That we have people there when the kids come through the door that we can see straight away, right, look, someone needs to see Mickey here, take him out, take him offside.
Just
with
going to bring
PSN,
Cara
we
back.
can do that.
I'm conscious she'll have another question she wants to ask, and I want to make sure she does get in, Cara. I know you
thank you,
have so
Chair.
much you'll want to say.
Of course, no, and I really welcome. I'm just taking a whole page of notes here because I can really tell the passion in the sense of if you get 99 things right, but you drop the ball on one thing, it's a disaster, and there's immense scrutiny and pressure. So that I really am picking that up. Just the last question, I suppose, in interests of time, when we're talking about adverse childhood experiences, we recently had the National Association of Children of Alcoholics do an informal briefing with us as a committee, and they talked about the pressure that a lot of young people are under in academic settings where they have a parent who is an alcoholic. Given the prevalence of alcohol addiction in the North, is this something you picked up on in your research or your lived experience as principals? What forms of effective leadership have you seen when trying to uplift and support those children?
I'll just start by saying that we didn't focus particularly on that, and I don't remember that coming up specifically, but there's no doubt that these school leaders are doing a lot of what's been referred to as the heavy lifting in education in terms of the percentage of children with special educational needs, the percentage of looked after children, newcomer children, free school meal entitled children. There's no doubt, I mean, statistically it's very clear that these schools offer many challenges, and that principals therefore have to adopt sometimes similar but often different strategies to the principals in other contexts with fewer children with free school meals, SEN, and so on and so forth. So I'll pass to them in a second, but could I just say one thing, and that is there is an opportunity here as well. I mean, I'm conscious that the tender is out at the minute for the new professional qualification in headship, and I do think there's an opportunity here for that to be designed taking the best of the old PQH that was run by the RTU, which appears, and for years we've heard how successful that was, bringing it up to date, tapping into the resource of recently retired principals like Padraig and Katrina and many others, and that was something that we heard right across the 13 principals, the rest of whom I think are still leading their schools, that they wanted to pass on their expertise and their experience to others, but there currently wasn't really a structure for them to do that. There wasn't some kind of way where they could step out of the classroom for one day a week in almost like a phased retirement mode where they could mentor a newly appointed principal. That system, which might have been the case once upon a time under PQH, needs to be reinstated. So there is an opportunity here, and I want to be positive about it, that hopefully whoever wins the tender could tap into the resource that we have.
I think we can certainly pick that up as a committee action. I'll have to just draw a line on that one and bring the next member in, and that'll be Danny. You'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank yous. I'm going to start just as a parent, and like how important pastoral care is, and that decision when you're sending your child to a school and picking a school. And I know I'm in a privileged position to have that you go looking and around and picking. And my view always, long before being a politician, was if you can get a child to fall in love with going to school, the academic side of it will come, the learning does come.
That's it.
But I see the differences even in my children's setup. My eldest is very academic, and I really don't know where she gets that there from. She is a high flyer in that regard, and I look at my wee lad who's just went into first year, and he loves sport, so he goes and plays everything in the school, and he runs out the door to go to school, so it's great. But my big concern, and particularly I do have a love for youth work as well, and talking to young people, is that the changes are coming. So we hear the curriculum reform and all what's going on, but they're not looking at primary school, and they're also not looking at the qualifications side of it. So if I even just look at my own wee family, I know my daughter will be fine, but my wee lad, if you remove coursework, if you remove AS levels, he ain't going to probably come away with what he really deserves to come away with. And I think that's being really lost and not being listened to. And you said consultation for consultation's sake. Parents are saying this, young people are saying this, school leaders are saying it, but the minister and the people he has in place to do all this are completely ignoring it, and they're looking at everything. And to me, they're not looking at it holistically, they're looking at it in isolation. And if you do things in isolation, you will always find what you want to get out of it. You'll cherry pick the evidence, and that's what they're doing. And I just want to hear, I understand this as a parent, how concerned I am. Are you really concerned about that in that way I'm saying it, coming across?
I mean, when you come to secondary school, I don't know if your kids are in primary school or secondary.
2 in secondary and 1 in primary school.
Aye. Do you see at key stage 3, that's where you should be building the foundations to getting them ready to have the skills? to be independent learners in particular, so they can do the work for the GCSEs and A-level. You know, and I think the work has to be done in there as well, so that they have the skills ready. So when they're going down and setting down for the Key Stage 4, when they come into their GCSEs and A-levels, they're far more prepared for it. But I wouldn't be worried unduly, you know, with people, you know, come in and said, oh, he's all full of sport and he loves sport. That's right. You hone in on that. They love that, right? As you say, they're happy to go to school. He's happy to go to school, so he is, because of the sport, whatever.
Yeah.
The rest comes.
Yep.
And that's all down to staffing. And I'm not talking about teachers, I'm talking about classroom assistants. I'm talking about the secretaries, everybody here, the caretakers. You know, and I think it's an absolute disgrace, the pay that classroom assistants are getting, and they do the hardest jobs, so they do, you know. But in disadvantaged schools, you know, it's if you've got the right staff, your kid will be happy. All right.
You've got a review there of the curriculum that are saying that they are not, like, it's that knowledge rich. They're not going to follow what happened across the water with Gove and all. But they're not then looking at the qualification side of it, which it's very clear that the high stakes exams are having a damage and impact across it. They're looking to undo the damage that Gove and Co have done. But we're now proposing it here, that this is going to actually happen, that we're going to put more pressure and more hours on GCSEs. They're saying there'll be less testing. That's actually not the case. No. It's not what the evidence is.
I honestly believe that we need to just stop and go right back to P1 and start a new curriculum from P1 and build it up. Now, it's going to take 12, 14 years. But you got to put the cart, or is it the cart before the horse? You got to say, well, what is the end goal, right? What is our end goal? So we need to start somewhere. We need to go back and start. It was great when we changed the Key Stage 3 curriculum a few years ago, because and I'll put my hands up, I taught at Key Stage 3 to a GCSE exam curriculum. And everything I was doing was because I know these kids have to get through this exam so when that was changed, and there was that bit more flexibility, it was so much better, because you could teach so much more through those skills, and you could learn, but you could actually do it so well. And the whole issue of the more vocational qualifications is absolutely phenomenal for those young people at Key Stage 4, but bringing that back down into Key Stage 3 as well, and making it more realistic and making it more real. I mean, I keep going back to this careers. What's your future? What's out there? Your son going on to do the sport, great. But what's to stop him being a physio, being an occupational therapist, being a sports therapist? I mean, being a sports manager, you know, because he has to have a C in his English and a C in his maths, and that's tough for a lot of young people. But at the end of the day, you got to get it right for them, and each child is an individual. You get what that child is about and what that child wants and needs. You find that very quick.
You have to engage them.
You do. Yeah.
And that's what the curriculum's about.
Kids.
And it's about changing it and chopping and changing every year. You know, it's as if we're at school, you go, right, that's what you're doing, tough, get on with it. You know, you go, no, that doesn't work. So you go, right, see this year. And they say, oh, compare your data from last year. Last year's a different crowd of kids. These are the kids that are coming through.
I think I'm nailing the heads right there. 12 to 14 years of curriculum change, not overnight, because this is what this is. This is like a bombardment too fast.
It's far too fast.
It's putting teachers under it, and I have to hold my hands up and say I'm really quite glad I retired when I did, because I would hate the thought of knowing the staff I had, the amazing staff I had, the pressure that is putting them under when I meet them out now, and they're saying things to me like, you look great, and I'm going, have you seen yourself in a mirror recently? Because they're just exhausted, they are, and they're trying to do everything, and they're bending over backwards to help the youngsters. But they just feel like, is this going to have to happen in September? Is this going to have to go through? Is this going to have to? So
I'll not tell you how much they're spending on this transform aid so far. So
and
there's leaky roofs.
But
thank you.
Yeah, Danny. David, you'd indicated next.
Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting session so far. It is great to hear the passion, and particularly relate to the relational stuff that you speak about and how important that is. I think many of us will, whether it's through our own education, but also through seeing, I don't have children, but the younger family members going through schools who perhaps not the most academic, but who done best under those usually younger teachers, actually fresh to the profession, who still had the enthusiasm, not to take away from the experienced ones, but with the enthusiasm. And I think that probably loads part of my question is that And I'm going to ask a couple of questions together because there's one I want to get in at the end, and so I'll ask you and you can speak to them. But how do we foster that morale and keep it enthusiasm with teachers to lean into that relational piece, to build those relationships, to not just tick the boxes in terms of teaching, and also then how you talked about the importance of teachers having a link with the local community and understanding of the local community and those interpersonal skills as well. How do we place value on that in terms of training and recruitment from the initial teacher training onward?
Look, you see, when it comes down to the interview, when you're looking at somebody coming in, I'm looking to find out how are they going to get on with my wains.
Yeah.
I don't give a damn if they got a first in this from Cambridge. All right, it's about how they're going to get on with the kid. That subject knowledge is vital. All right, they need that, but that should be taken as granted. It's a vocation.
Yeah.
If you don't like wains, don't apply. You know, and it's basically so you're saying about how do we make sure that they interact with them. You get the right staff in. There's staff who are going to push the kids, set high expectations of them, and get on with them. The staff are going to go, as I say to our staff, look, the Waynes will give up. Mm-hmm. We just can't give up on them, all right? Who cares if they give up? That's all right. That's what they're Waynes. We never give up on our kids, and it's pushing and pushing and pushing. And how do we do it? It's through relationships, getting through the barriers, getting through the aces, so that we get bang. Oh, there we go. We've got that person. So that is vital, and that's why usually in our school the staff are lifers. I say they'll stay for 25 years. All right. So it's not just the young ones, but I get your point. They're so enthusiastic.
Not to generalise at all, by the way.
But surely you're trying to say why not?
Oh yeah. But it's how in any job people will have good times and bad times. Yeah. How do you maintain that? And the first thing to go, I think, would almost be the relational side, because you can turn up, you can tick the boxes, but how do you?
That's a support for the staff.
Yeah.
Putting the mental health support in for the staff. Staff are in together. You've got to realise, because you come out in the classroom, or you come out and you go, oh, gee, I could kill that fella there, so you could, right? And then you got somebody else that goes, I know, and look at this, and then you laugh. And it's having that collegiality, having each other's back, that you're not on your own. And see, when you're in that classroom and you've got difficulties, there's someone else there. The door's open, you have that support there. All right? And that's what you need, and that's what we always have. Staff, you talked about staff in your school, and I talk about staff, it's vital. When I say staff, it's not teachers, it's everybody. It's everybody. And it's vital, and it's how they get on. That's what keeps it going. My concern is with initial teacher training is that some of the people coming through now know a hell of a lot more than I do and tell me what to do. Yeah. And they're very good at that. Or there's a sense of entitlement. I'm not saying everybody, but there might be a sense of entitlement. All right. So what I'm saying that I do believe there needs to be work done there with the universities, as in getting the teachers out to help, to getting the teachers ready, or the initial teachers ready.
Noel's desperate to come in. I know David has a final question, so I'll let Noel respond and then bring David in for a final question.
Just very quickly, across the 13 schools, we heard from all the principals about the importance of the teachers, when they were appointed, being able to relate to that community, and often they were from that local community or a similar working class community, and they got it. They understood, maybe they were invested, maybe they were former pupils, and we heard actually lots of great examples of that, and I can think of one of our top students from last year has got a job back in Mercy College, where she herself was a pupil, top student at Stranmillis, back into Mercy College, doing amazing work there in a great school, and Mercy was one of the 13 schools that we identified here as well. So having that passion and connection with the local community is hard to teach out of a textbook, David. With all due respect to my colleagues at Stranmillis, you don't read that in a textbook. You're born with that, or you experience it, or you've grown up with it.
Develop as well,
and
you can
develop.
you're working.
Yeah.
Well, you definitely can.
I think David's keen to ask a final question, so I'll let.
Oh, this has been very interesting. We listen to it much more, but I guess the other element I wanted to point to, which came up right at the start, was the faith element and how that plays into the ethos and how that influences how you do. And you're right to say those elements of respect and so on will play into many of our schools regardless. It has always struck me, as someone who's not from that background, that when I've been in Catholic schools, that the ethos is much more present and obvious in that way. It's much more subtle, I think, in our controlled schools and so on, where that is. Do you think that plays a role, and do you think that is something that other schools could learn from?
I do. I'm going to let you speak.
No, I've spoken too much, bro.
Coming from the school I was in, my school, we had 42 different languages in the school, so we had young people from all the traditions, right the way across the world. We're the most ethnic diverse school in Northern Ireland, and everything was very in your face, as in celebrated and achieved. So we had language of the month, we had all this religious and non-religious festivals, traditions, whatever. And to me, that it has to be out there and has to be that everybody is welcome and accepted and celebrated. And I do think sometimes maybe, I understand what you mean about the maintained sector and it can be very visual, but in the control sector maybe it's not as visual because nobody's really sure what to do or not do, because society at the minute is so mixed up in a lot of things, and recent issues over the last number of years in certain areas, and most of the areas were from the disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds, that there was trouble and strife. So people, don't mention it, and then it's not there, and that is possibly an issue. But from my perspective, it was very much, it has to be in your face and it has to be there for everyone. And sorry, I know, but I want to say this. So listen, thank you very much, David.
I can tell the members what to do. It's harder to tell Katrina what to do.
The initial teacher training thing, that just to go back to that point now that he stopped talking, is that yes, I've been in doing the interviews in Stranmillis, St Mary's, Queen's, whatever. You know when they walk through the door, and when you read their application, whether it's through the UCAS or whether it's for the PGCE programme, whether they're going to literally be eaten up, spat out, and bones used for flossing, it's going to be, have these young people experience of working in a youth setting. I love seeing people who are previous youth workers that you mentioned coming in, because they get it. They get it. In the school I'm in, we don't have one local community. Like, we have teachers from all over Northern Ireland who travel in every day. So they're not necessarily, from the local community, but they got it. They just get the kids and they get what it is about the kids. So when you see those young people coming in, and the question I always ask, when they give you, when you go to these teacher training interviews, they give you a set of possible questions. I totally ignore that because I'm a cheeky sod, and I actually ask, well, what are the things that are affecting young people at the minute, and how would it affect their education? I want to know about the mental health and the social media and all of that. Because if these young people who I'm interviewing get that, then they're going to get the kids, because they know what they're talking about. So, and I'm going to stop.
Thank you.
I know.
David, just ethos is vital.
Yes. Yeah. No, I agree.
Right? When you walk in through the door, you should feel that warmth.
I agree.
That's all. Yeah. Without saying or anything, you just feel it. That's it.
Irrespective of because I've still two other members who need to come in, and look, the passion and the expertise in the combination of that at the table is. It's palpable in the room, so it's great to hear from you, but I just want to make sure that I'm fair to all members to give them appropriate time, and that we do stick to some semblance of time for the meeting. So Cathy, you were next.
Thanks, Chair. God, it's so refreshing to have you here, honestly. It really is. If we could bottle you two and put you into the EA in the department, I think we'd have a transformed education system. But Katrina, I just want to pick up on something you said there. It's actually really sad. You said you're glad you retired when you did, and speaking to other principals and how they're looking and things, like, that's really, really sad. Yes. It's really stark, actually, what you're saying. But I want to pick up, Noel, on something you said around these schools that the 13 schools, and all of the schools, I suppose, in areas of disadvantage, picking up, the pieces and doing a lot of the heavy lifting around special educational needs, around newcomer children. And we've heard evidence before around the specialist provisions now that schools are setting up, and the majority of them being in those areas of disadvantage. I know in my own area, a lot of schools doing the heavy lifting. Some of them have 6 or 7 of these specialist provisions, yet we have grammar schools who have none. What's your view on that, or why do you think that is the case?
Well, I mean, the whole SEN situation, as you know, I mean, there are many reports over the last 10 to 15 years identifying challenges in the system there. And I suppose you could look at the rise of the SPIM in two ways. You could look at it as a kind of move towards greater inclusion and having children with more complex special educational needs part of mainstream schools, albeit in special classes, like in the south. Or you could look at it as a kind of crisis management, because the special schools, and I'm a governor of a special school, are bursting at the seams, and we can't take any more children. We don't have enough room. We're losing specialist classrooms for this, that, and the other. So there is a well-recognised crisis within special educational needs. I mean, how you deal with that, there is potential for SPIMs to be extremely effective, and if you take that positive, you know, in many ways, more inclusive systems don't have separate special schools, and would argue that those children should be part of mainstream schools. The challenge, I think, is not where they are, it's how well resourced they are and how well staffed, and that's come through.
Everybody taking up the slack, you know, it's not a burden on any one school.
No.
You know,
Which unfortunately now it seems to be that there are schools who are doing heavy lifting.
We've 200 statement of kids out of 900, 22%. I think it's the biggest in the north. We love our statement of kids. See, when they come through that door, they're brilliant. That's the inclusion. What I'm saying is that other schools as well should be embracing them and welcome them. They bring so much to your school, so they do, so much diversity. But it gets to the stage then where you've got, a fifth of your school has got statements, never mind the others who are on, you know, the code of practice. But it's vital that everybody does the lifting there. And they'll get so much joy out of it. But trying to work with the EA on this and fight with EA about SEND is an absolute disgrace.
And do you think that's maybe putting some school leaders off? Is that battle that they'll have to face?
Well, it does.
When you speak to some colleagues who've taken on SPIMs and have had poor experiences, it does make you very concerned. I mean, my own experience is that year before last, they came out to do a survey of the school to put in a SPIM, and they said, well, we looked at your site plan, there is space for a 60 square foot, whatever, and we put it in. I was going, grand, where? We could put it there. I said, that's the only car park we have. Oh, right. Could we put it there? Well, no, can't. And then, I'm not exaggerating, 3.5 weeks later, I had somebody else come out to do the exact same survey because the report hadn't gone in that the survey had been done. So that was and then in September, the next term, I had someone else come out to do the same survey. So nobody seems to know what is going on, and I would like to know why, where my school is, surrounded by a lot of amazing post-primary schools and amazing grammar schools. Why are they not being made to take, you know, some of these young people? I mean, most of these young people have so much to give and so much to offer, and it's unbelievable. And the variety and how much they can enhance an entire school and the provision in that school and bring something different to it. Every school should be doing it. I don't like the term special needs. I prefer to call it individual needs. We've never used special needs in school because I don't want those young people thinking, well, you're special. I worry that if you have a SPIM, that's the, you know, I'm not going to say it, but you know what I mean. That's for those young, they can't do. They're no good. They're that table down in the corner, leave them over there. I don't like that feeling of isolation. And yes, it's great to bring them in, but for some of their core subjects, they need to have that one-on-one or smaller setting. But it has to be done in a different way, and I don't think SPIMs are the right answer.
Well, one downside for SPIMs, I say, is that you've got no control comes in through, neither. It's EA decide, you know, and with all our expertise in our own schools, we know what's good. We have no say over that.
I suppose that's a fear we've had as well. Sometimes it's like, unfortunately, getting a child off a list into a place rather than the place actually meeting their needs and fitting their needs as well.
Yeah. Particularly if
it's a parental request, and we understand the parental request, but it's not always in the best interest.
It's not always. But do you see when year 8, that's different. But do you see when you're told or by EA that like the statement of kids put your school down and they're in 3rd year or 4th year, you know, and they're saying, right, you have to take them, or whether it's DA, you know, saying that, that child's been excluded. You now have to ticket, and you put in, and you object and have the appeal, and they say, tough, you're ticking them. Those are the kinds of kids there that we can do very little for. It's very, very hard. If I get them in year 8, all right, but get them in year 10, 11 or 12, and then we have to divert the resources that we're using for our kids to these people who never want to come to us anyway. You know, and it's a minefield there.
I wanted to really quick.
Final comment, just to finish up.
It was just, Noel, again, around whenever you were conducting this research too, did you notice any correlation with early years in terms of there being preschool provision in those areas? I know Sure Start in areas of disadvantage and the likes of that are very strong links. I'm just wondering if there was any correlation.
Well, we didn't explore that at all. We focused just on post-primary, Cathy, but there could well be, and it wouldn't surprise me, and we know how important Sure Start and Toy Box and those different programmes are in disadvantaged communities, but we didn't focus on this.
And I think it's in my mind that really in the educational disadvantage piece, we haven't really gone down the early years route there yet, and that might be something that the committee does want to pick up in terms of future evidence sessions.
First Start report was very vocal on that.
We can pick that up. And Peter, you indicated last there.
Thank you, Chair. I'm personally worried I only get one question in because it's particularly targeted towards Padraig. Padraig, you got as far as saying, in response to my colleague around faith-based, the faith-based theme that ran through some of the research and the importance of that, particularly in the Catholic sector or the maintained sector. You said ethos is vital, and then you got stopped. Okay, so here's your chance.
No, look,
what were you going to say next?
Don't do that.
See, I only know the Catholic sector and the CCMS sector, and it surprises me when people say that it mightn't be in the controlled sector, because that is what it's all about. It's about whenever you come in through that door, you're without anybody talking to you, without you even seeing anybody in the reception, you walk in, you go, "There's a great feel about this place." There's something there, all right? But it's instilling in the kids straight away. You know, it's your ethos links totally in with the vision. You know, that's what for us, that's what it is. We call it the ethos. It's not a Catholic ethos per se. You know, because our vision would be, you know, preparing pupils for success, and our 4 core things are care, courtesy, respect, responsibility. That's what they live by. That's what creates our ethos, and it's holding them to it's holding to high expectations. So it is, and high standards. So it means get that top button done, tuck that shirt in, see those wee small things, so they get used to it when they see you. But it's all of that is preparing them for life, but it's making them feel welcome. Coming through those doors. If you get them in year 8, and we spend so much time in year 8, you've got them there. So they get the ethos.
You promised me one question.
No, I said I thought I'd only get one question, Chair. But Padraig was so brilliant there. He's got a secondary. You mentioned, actually, you touched on the second thing I was going to ask, which is around expectation and aspiration. You said in the research, common thread through all 13 interviews was strong commitment to champion children, both in terms of their academic attainment and also their holistic development. So you just touched on holistic development. You referenced, top button or all of that. How important is academic aspiration in principles to push the children to aspire, either aspiration or expectation? I mean, that's for anybody, really.
You treat these children as if they are your own children, and you want the very, very best for your child. And whatever that is, that has to be for that individual child. And you will get to know that about that child and what it is. And that you could be the only person that has spoken to that child that day, smiled at that child, or done anything. And that instills it, right? They believe in me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to really show. And I always look, every single child in my school is my child. What do I want for my child? And I want the best for my child. And I will push that child. Even if they tell me to, I will keep pushing until I get the best for that child, because that's what my job is and that's what I'm there for.
The most stressful days is the day the results are out, for principals.
Oh, I love that day.
Oh, jeez.
I love it.
It's because that's what you're measured on. Doesn't matter, because no one sees all the other pastoral work. But all that pastoral work is what makes the attainment. So we don't focus on that. I don't go around saying, we got these results and that results. Right? We don't. We talk about our pastoral care. See, you get that right. I've said it so many times, you get that right, that's where the attainment will come. Because you're setting high expectations of everything. High expectations of attendance, punctuality, uniform, behaviour. We link, see, we never touched on behaviour. But behaviour is so important in a socially deprived area and disadvantage, that once you get that right as well, you know, that's what sets the teaching and learning and allowing it to work. But it's hard going.
So I would say just to conclude, it's the bedrock really of attainment. So the relationships that you've talked about consistently here, our principles, and the pastoral care is the bedrock on which attainment is built, and that's really important. And it's not soft and fluffy, and it gets a bad name, you know, pastoral care. It's, you know, we don't do pastoral care, we do grades. Both are interlinked.
Yeah, it's a weave.
Yeah.
You're coming in together, so they are. They're both vital, so they are.
So, final quick question is actually linking all the way back to what Pat started with, which was 13 schools form part of the study, 1 controlled, 2 integrated, 9 maintained, 1 Irish medium, all identified as high-performing schools above the average, and obviously there was criteria set, and that criteria effectively picked the schools. You didn't really pick them, but there was a lot of benchmarking, and that's obviously the outworking of that. Given how many maintained schools and how many controlled schools we have in Northern Ireland, you would have hoped, maybe expected, there to be more control schools on that list and more of a balance, okay? So swinging all the way back to the Independent Review of Education, reading 8.8.2 here, there's an immediate need to have a specific support function for the control sector. This will involve, in the short term, a dedicated director with an EA to manage control schools. The director should become the basis of a new statutory authority or a new control schools unit. Just linking back to what Pat asked at the start, would you accept that somehow control schools do need more support? Padraig was actually quite warm about CCMS and some of the things that CCMS have added to the sector. Would it be your evidence that actually control schools need more support and a little bit more help to lift the schools, which might then balance the sort of sample that you took for this?
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, in response to Pat's question, we've heard for years, going back to the Fair Start work that we did, where we met a lot of principals from every sector in Northern Ireland, that there was a certain level of frustration among control school principals that they maybe weren't getting the same level of support that others in other sectors were receiving. And I don't think that has particularly changed over the last 4 or 5 years. Whether the CSU, as part of the EA, will solve that overnight remains to be seen. I think it's a more complex issue than that, and there are issues around the size of some post-primary controlled non-selective schools as well that perhaps needs to be taken into consideration. So it's a more complex picture, but we've certainly heard that. Not even so much through this, because we had only one controlled school principal to speak to in a very successful school, the Boys Model. But from my other experience of research, I've heard that, on many occasions, Peter.
I wrote something down here, Peter, and I don't know, I'm going to say it anyway. He knows what I'm like. Too many chiefs and not enough Indians.
Do you want to say a wee bit more about that, Gunnar? No.
Says it all.
Okay, fine.
I hope it says it all.
Okay.
That's me. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all for an excellent evidence session there, and there was just so many ideas fizzing around there. I mean, it's hard to know even where to begin, where we might pick up on it. And I think that the challenge will actually be in terms of taking that enthusiasm, passion, and all that experience and translating that into what does the department now need to do to actually make this a reality across the board. Not just notable examples of good practice, but that some of this stuff is normalised in practice in the schools. But that's for our conversation afterwards. But thank you all for your time and the energy and enthusiasm we've had today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So as the witnesses are just making their way out, happy just to open up quick discussion in terms of any actions that might follow on from that. It might be a case of one that needs to maybe just percolate through for a week to have a think about that. But if there's anything obvious that arises at this stage that we would want to flag with department or EA, happy to open the floor up. I know the clerk had made a quick note of something there that you might want to raise, but anything specific?
The TSN matter was raised, and there was a PAC report closing the gap on that in 2022, so I just thought that the committee might want to get an update from the department on progress against those recommendations.
Yeah, I'm certainly happy to endorse that if we're content with that, yeah. I would certainly, as a simple, straightforward action, it might be worthwhile just sharing the research, which obviously the department will have had sight of already, but to ask them for their response on how they would envisage translating this good practice into something that actually filters through the whole system. Because those were, and Peter referenced the independent review, that sort of graph in the independent review plotting those schools that sit in that space where they're sort of bucking the trend around the level of deprivation but the outcomes. It would be good to see what the department's actually doing to try and operationalise that good practice. So I'd be keen to see that, Michelle.
So only going to endorse that, but I'd almost encourage them to watch the session. That was maybe the best session I've been in this whole time I've been in this committee. I'd do anything those guys ask me to. I can see why the kids are succeeding, because you can feel the leadership. Do you know what I mean? So I would almost encourage them to actually really listen to that.
Absolutely, and I don't think we can sort of understate obviously the workload challenges and the industrial relations context we're in here, and for my takeaway is how can we free principals up to ensure they can do that good work and not all the other extraneous stuff that drives the workload pressure. So I'll bring the Deputy Chair in and then yourself, David.
And Chair, I thought it was just on that point on workload and reform together that Katrina actually was speaking about changing the curriculum over 14 years. Yeah. This minister wants to change it over 14 months, and also the issue around the curriculum in primary schools, which we haven't heard a lot about, but which the person who was appointed to review the curriculum actually told us last week that the transfer test does distort and skew the curriculum in primary schools. And the point I made about you would expect nursery, primary and post-primary that there would be a continuum of some sort there, but if it's being skewed in the middle, how does it help the far end of it? That's so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There are just so many avenues to pursue with that, so I'll bring David in as well.
I'll sidestep politics there and just say I agree actually with Michelle in terms of that was one of the better, if not the best, session I can recall, and certainly in recent memory in the committee. I actually think we should look to do more like that and get deeper into that. The committee, because of the time restrictions, doesn't always allow us to do that, but maybe look at ways in which we can do that, because I think it'd be worthwhile hearing more from both the guys that are here and others like that. They'll have said things that we'll all have agreed with, and others that will have challenged us all in different things, but well worth listening. The passion comes across and reflects, I think, all of our experiences when we're in school, so I think worth doing more of that.
Which perhaps I think just flags Kathy's point around the early years angle, so that was really helpful session around post-primary. I think the early years element in terms of the education underachievement, and I think there's maybe even some stuff in correspondence there, but potentially some research coming through where there's scope for that. So no, plenty to take away. So we're content with those actions in terms of sharing the research, getting an update on the PAC report, and seeking a ministerial response, I think, around how the department envisages embedding some of this good practice across the board, and then perhaps there may be other things arising from that. We agreed? Mm-hmm. Okay. Definitely a change in challenge for me than managing members' time, but it was witnesses today who had more to say than members, but that's perhaps how it should be. So I will move us on then to the next item on our agenda, which is
we comfort break.
If everyone's feeling the need of that,
I'll sneak out.
Danny will sneak out. I think we'll try and keep to time. Item 7 is an oral briefing from both Department of Education and EA officials on youth services. So just while the witnesses are coming through, refer members to the clerk's note at page 139 of your packs, a response from the department on issues raised by the Youth Work Alliance at page 141, with a slightly revised response then provided subsequent to that at page 3 of your table papers. And then we have correspondence from the EA's Chief Transformation Officer around youth service issues at page 143 of your packs. So I'll just let the witnesses get seated. Joining us today, I'll introduce who we have with us, and then obviously if any changes to job titles or roles, obviously please do let me know. We have Julie Humphreys, Head of Youth Work Policy Team at the Department of Education. We have Andrew Scott, Director of Collaborative Education and Youth in the Department of Education. We have Thomas Adele, Chief Transformation Officer in the Education Authority, and Arlene Key, the Assistant Director responsible for Youth Services in the Education Authority. So you're all very welcome today, and thank you for your time. And this has been an issue we've had quite a bit of correspondence both through committee, and I think individual members have been receiving a fair bit of correspondence around issues related to youth services, and it has been a while since we've heard on this particular policy area from both EA and department, so it is great to have you here. So I think at this stage I'll really hand over for any opening presentation that you wish to make. I would ask for that to be up to 10 minutes, and then we'll move into question and answer from there. So I'm not sure who's leading. Is it yourself, Andrew? Yeah, so I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon to the committee. I'd like to begin by thanking the committee for giving both the department and the Education Authority colleagues the opportunity to come here today to talk about youth services. Today I want to outline our vision for the sector, the context of the current financial position, the important work that's underway to shape the future of youth services through a comprehensive policy review. In terms of the purpose of youth work, at its core, youth work remains an integral part of our education system. 12 years on from the launch of the current Priorities for Youth policy, its purpose is even more relevant to improving the lives and outcomes for our young people. Young people today are facing increased challenges and pressures, including those arising from societal and technological changes. Young people choose to be involved in youth work, which aims to provide informal education and youth programmes for children and young people aged between 4 and 25, to improve outcomes for children and young people in areas such as emotional health and well-being, leadership, social skills and confidence, to support young people's personal and social development, especially those who may feel socially excluded, help young people to develop their potential and to participate positively in wider society. This work is more relevant than ever and directly supports the wider strategic context, including the Programme for Government, Transform Ed in the department, and the Children and Young People's Strategy 2020 to 2030, which aims to support the rights and improve the well-being of all children and young people. In terms of the legal and policy context for youth work, the Education Authority has a legal duty to secure the provision of adequate youth facilities, and it delivers youth activities directly and indirectly through the community and voluntary sector to meet this duty. The department has undertaken a policy review through a co-design approach, ensuring the voice of young people is central to this. We've established a young persons reference group, a regional advisory group, a policy reference group, and a cross-departmental group to gather evidence overseen by a project board. The policy review process is nearing completion, and following the Minister's approval, the draft policy will be issued for public consultation. This will give all key stakeholders a further opportunity to shape the strategic direction for the sector. One of the elements of the proposed revised youth policy, building upon the existing policy framework, clarifies the intent that the community and voluntary sector should provide youth services as far as possible, with the EA Youth Service retaining overall responsibility and providing services directly where required to meet gaps in provision based on assessed need. Any such change in the business model is expected to phase in over time. I'm happy to provide the committee with a more detailed briefing on the proposed policy in due course if useful. Turning to the financial context, the committee is fully aware of the current budgetary constraints departments are working under. The Minister has already expressed his significant concerns in the draft allocation for this department. The risk of insufficient funding presents a real and imminent risk across all education services. While budgets for 26-27 and beyond have not been formally agreed by the Executive, we recognise the impact that budget uncertainty has on our youth sector, and we would seek to, as much as possible, provide clarity to our stakeholders. To provide assurances to schools and other organisations, the Education Authority will shortly be provided with an indicative opening resource budget allocation for 26-27 in advance of the new financial year.
It is important to note that the EA will receive a composite block grant for both schools and youth services. The use of a composite block grant does not in itself reduce the budget. This approach affords the EA and its board the autonomy to make important local decisions on how best to deploy its overall budget. In an effort to provide for stability in the short term, the EA has provided assurances to the community and voluntary sector at risk that funding will be available for the first financial quarter. As many of us in this room know, youth services play a crucial role in communities and, importantly, in the lives of our children and young people. We would, of course, like more investment in education, including in youth services. To not do so risks a negative impact on our young people, our public services and our future society. Any support the committee can provide in the pursuit of timely, sufficient, multi-year budgets would be appreciated. In parallel, it is also essential that we continue to maximise the funding that we do have available. We look to reduce duplication and ensure all organisations work collaboratively. Turning to the role of the community and voluntary sector, youth services are a statutory service, some of which are delivered directly by the EA and others through our community and voluntary sector partners. This nuance is important. This is not a case of statutory versus non-statutory provision, and more a case of direct and partner delivery models. In making decisions on youth services from its indicative budget, which currently stands at approximately £37 million for youth alone, the EA must be mindful of the emerging policy context, specifically the delivery role of the community and voluntary sector. As such, the expectation will be that the EA will continue to nurture and support the sector within the available, albeit likely constrained, resources. In conclusion, we believe that by working together with children and young people across departments, with the EA, with the vital community and voluntary sector, we can build on the youth service to make sure it is agile, responsive and based on the needs of our young people. I hope that the department and in turn the EA is sufficiently resourced in order to do so. Thank you. My colleagues and I are happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andrew. I mean, there were probably things I was going to pick up, but I'll start on budget just because of the information you've shared there around that move towards the composite block grant. Can you just explain to committee why you've moved to that scenario? Because previously the expectation would have been that youth services that the EA would have had a defined budget for youth services to be spent only on that. Can you just explain what the rationale for that change is?
Yes, Chair, really that's part of wider consideration of the budget setting process and a move away from slicing the budget and providing various different earmarked budgets to more can we provide those as part of a composite grant that goes across to the Education Authority. The reason for that is then in turn the EA board are able to give consideration to that, and rather than looking at each aspect alone can there be greater synergies across those budgets and use those in a different way.
For those community and voluntary sector partners who are delivering services right now, currently the only real certainty they've got is that there's a funding envelope for the first quarter. I mean, are we in a scenario where on the other side of June the EA could make a decision we're not going to fund XYZ service anymore that have had funding for the first quarter? I think there's nervousness around that, understandably, based on the new approach.
I can understand that. Certainly, there are multiple issues in there, Chair. There's the size of the overall envelope that comes, and I think that is one issue. There's the timing of that envelope once confirmation comes through that will allow the department in turn to give certainty to the Education Authority. And then there's the decision that the Education Authority Board will need to make in terms of how it allocates the funds that are there. So I understand that that creates uncertainty, both because of the timing and because of the quantum of that being uncertain at this stage. And I must commend the EA's efforts to at least try to provide some certainty for the first quarter. But I understand that's not the position that we would want to be in. We'd want to provide certainty for the financial year and beyond.
And don't underestimate the challenges around the budget and the difficult position that you're in that regard. But how would you assess the level of risk that current providers locally may not be with us on the other side of June, given this uncertainty? Is that a real risk that you're planning for at the moment?
I think it's really hard to fully assess that risk at this point. We know that some of the providers in the community one sector are larger organisations, they obviously have have a degree of flexibility, easier to deal with changes in funding. Some are less strong. There is absolute risk. I think that the risk that there's no funding to community involvement sector, I can't see that happening. The question is what level of funding there will be available for that going forward. But until we have worked through properly with the community involvement sector what it means by the 1st of April, it's really hard to give the proper assessment of risk. I'm happy to come back to you after that's fully done.
I think other reps may return to budget. I just want there's so much to cover here. I wanted to come to one specific strand of funding, which is I think it's referred to as the regional strategic funding for community and voluntary sector support. That funding that provides support, and my understanding is that's for things around safeguarding, compliance, governance for those local groups. My understanding is that that's currently been set at 289,000 for the year for the community and voluntary sector local groups. So that's excluding Irish medium, excluding faith-based and uniformed groups. How confident are you that 289,000 provides the support that those 400 plus groups require? And I think particularly around areas like safeguarding, do you think that is sufficient?
You happy I take that? Thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, there's 2.95 million goes into supporting the community and voluntary sector at regional level. The community and voluntary sector is made up of a vast array of different types of organisations. 67% of our community and voluntary sector is delivered by completely volunteer-led organisations, and they receive 64% of that funding.
Not looking at those groups, so just that the 289,000.
So I just want to explain how the scaffolding and the outline of that works. Secondly, so there's different sectors. So it's very important to note that there is no reduction in funding to regional strategic organisations. Secondly, in terms of what we are seeking to do, there has been significant engagement with organisations at regional level and the local level. And as our colleagues in the department have already pointed out, working together in partnership is the best way forward. So there are different opportunities for funding that we have offered for this year. One is a workforce development strategy in partnership between the community and voluntary sector and ourselves, which is more efficient and more effective in a policy requirement. One is also presiding the voice of children and young people right across. And the third one is actually planning between regional and voluntary groups at a local level. There is then also fourthly, a very good proportion of our funding that goes into supporting community groups only. Those community groups are managed by professional full-time employees who have JNC qualifications. They have very strong management committees that have a lot of strength behind them. And we have engaged significantly with both the member groups at a regional and local level to determine what is required moving forward. In that engagement, over 60% of the local groups said they didn't understand what previously these organisations were funded for. And so what we have changed in this year is to make it very clear that this is about child protection, it is about governance support, and it is making sure that local organisations can in fact use their money to the best benefits for children and young people. And we have costed that out.
Yeah.
And we are in the process of awarding a contract to an organisation that has a very good track record, and we have very good processes in place to make sure that they can complete that work, and we are confident in the process that we've engaged in.
And that's the 289,000 figure. I suppose it's just to get back to my original question, that's to support really quite a large number of groups, particularly in the area around safeguarding. I just wanted your assessment of the extent to which that will actually adequately resource.
We are very confident that will be taken forward confidently. The organisation I can name as the Youth Work Alliance is the organisation that has secured that award, and they have provided us with an action plan which clearly demonstrates that they can meet the outworking of that required specification, and we will be monitoring that accordingly.
And just one final point on that, was that change in how the regional funding for community and voluntary sector support, that change in the funding structure of that, was that taken or approved at EA board level or at programme fund level?
Yeah, so there's, from 3 years ago, there was a programme board set up specifically to review how the Education Authority considered its funding to the community and voluntary sector, and even more than that, how we assessed need and how we determined how much money went to the community and voluntary sector and how much statutory services provided. Our EA board led on that strategically and had 3 whole days set aside to consider the governance and processes, all of that, and a programme board was established, and the programme board reports through all the EEA structures right through to CLT and then on to board, and all the decisions for our funding are contained within that format.
This new approach
was part of the funding programme board.
Has been approved by the at EA board level.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question for me is just on the consultation around the policy direction. When will that be out? Can you give us a time scale on that? It feels like it's been in sort of in due course for quite some time.
I was going to say, Chair, I would prefer to say in due course then as well, but like we're hopeful. We're trying to get it out this side of Easter, but I'm conscious that's now incredibly tight. So I think it's going to fall into more likely into the early part of April, because I want to wash it through the groups that are involved in that, and then get it out to public consultation. But I'm hoping a lot of the work that we've done to date will mean that we've had that extensive engagement, and there shouldn't be too many major surprises that come from that. But certainly we'll be keen to hear from the committee as part of that exercise, and again, happy to come back and give further briefing on it too.
So I'll just try and make sure I've understood. This will in fairly short order after Easter.
It is imminent.
Is
that as well? We're talking days and weeks rather than months.
Okay. Because I mean, you don't need me to tell you that the level of sort of interest in this within the sector, and I think just what a long-standing issue it's been in terms of nailing down this policy direction. I'll leave it at that, and I'll bring in other members at this stage. I have Danny indicating any other members looking to come in at this stage. Danny.
Thank you, Chair. If you don't mind, if I direct my first question to you, Arlene, if that's okay. Look, I'm going to just give my view on this new direction approach from the Minister. I think it's absolutely reckless to bring it like a block. Because I say this because youth funding will now be in direct competition with other pressures within the Education Authority. What reassurances can the EA or concerns of the EA have of the way the Minister's now set this up?
I suppose there's 2 things to say. First of all, our board are very supportive of youth services, and they've taken significant time and interest and receive regular reports on what we do, and we're a very important service. That is very, very clear to myself and all the staff. Secondly, it is a really important service and is built into the legislation. Unfortunately, adequate youth services doesn't say how much is adequate and how do you determine what is adequate. Normally, legally, that has been interpreted as how much money you have, then you provide it. That's what adequate services are. I know that the decision to look at our funding this way has only been taken very, very recently, and I think we do have a lot of work with our board members and with our colleagues in the rest of the Education Authority to determine how do we take that forward against all of the competing priorities, and it's not possible to say at this stage how that will happen.
So to me then, that confirms to me how reckless of a decision the Minister's taken to almost push that on to the EA and to the board, and I think it's for political gain and the punishment of our young people. So can I ask then of the department what specific safeguards that you are going to implement to ensure that our young people are supported and adequately the services that are on the front line are not impacted?
Yeah, Chair, well I think the levers that are available to the department remain the same on that as well. So, the legislative context is there. The requirement is to deliver adequate youth services, and those are determined through an assessment of need process that EA colleagues run. The policy context is still what I outlined at the start in terms of the purpose of youth work and we want to deliver for our young people, and I think that is all the more important than it's ever been. So, given the autonomy across to the EA, whenever the budget sat and was earmarked or put into a separate budget by the department, it was still in a position of actually competing for the same pot of money, competing for different things, and the department had to make a decision of what it was putting in one budget versus what it was putting in another. So that doesn't materially reduce the budget. I think it's passing that across to EA.
Was ring fenced around 1% of the overall educational
And there's nothing to say that the Education Authority Board won't make a decision in that regard. We will shift to that responsibility where we are operating in more of a client role, working with the Education Authority colleagues to make sure that the policy is implemented effectively and it's delivered.
Okay, but increasing the community voluntary role in the front line delivery, EA acting as the creator, as you said. I remember sitting down in late 2023, maybe early 24, with a number of youth workers, and it was clearly stated to me by them that the department had said that such a model was not achievable under current legislation. So what legislation are we expecting to see come forward, or what has changed other than the Minister having a bit of a political run here?
The Minister hasn't been involved in the legislation. We've taken advice and looked at this as we've developed the policy. So the policy direction has become clear, and then we've spoken to our solicitors to say, does this policy direction require legislative change or not? The legislation that's there already under the 1986 order provides for the provision of adequate youth services, and it doesn't inhibit the EA in either providing that directly or through third parties. It enables both of those models to work.
The legislation was always there then?
In my view, that's the case, and that would be my reading of the legislation. That's the legal advice, and that the Minister hasn't involvement in
involvement in the change of direction here of how the funding and the block going in? Is the Minister...
In terms of the legislation on it, the Minister hasn't involved in that. He's been consulted and engaged as part of the policy direction.
Yeah, okay. So it'd be fair to say then you recognise that this reliance on now the 3 month that our youth leaders have, the detrimental impact that it's actually having. Many of the ones that I work with are already looking for employment, and I think they've been around this merry-go-round for quite a number of years now, and for me it feels like this is the most dangerous approach they could have took, because they now look at it and go, no, there is a real possibility that even the specifications that went out in recent times may not even be honoured over the 12-month period, never mind the 1, 2, 3 years we have to go forward. What would you say to them?
It is not the position that we want to be in. The EA went out with the expectations that they'd be able to offer contracts, offer grants to deliver the schemes that we want to deliver. The issue is it's all budget dependent, and the concern is, and as the Minister has already outlined, the budget levels in the draft budget are insufficient to the degree of, I think it's £0.6 million going forward into next year, and then to the tune of £1 billion the year after. Those levels can't be sustained without
in the Minister's
impact.
decision then to make it then like a block grant allocation when it comes to youth work then to the EA? Is this him just passing his buck here right over to the EA, put it against the pricers, and that frontline services and our young people will suffer?
That's not my understanding. My understanding is this is getting into a position of, instead of slicing and dicing lots of things across the education budget, it has tried to, as much as possible, give the EA the freedom, the autonomy to make choices within that budget. Now, the frustration is the level of the budget needs to be sufficient, and certainly more sufficient than it is the trajectory has been in recent times. We need to make the argument for greater investment.
Minister, you've just that's it in a nutshell. You've turned it into political football. Are you for?
Chair, that's certainly not the evidence that I've presented.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Danny. Any other indications, Michelle?
Thanks very much. I have learned a lot in this committee the time I've been here, but I think I've still got a lot to learn about youth services. I've been trying to engage and learn a bit more about it. Some of these questions will kind of reflect that kind of engagement and what the concerns are. So one thing I was going to ask was about youth services does seem to be quite cross-cutting in nature. So the Children's Services Cooperation Act, has that been used to help pull budget together? Ask that first.
We're in the foothills of that. It hasn't been formally used. There are structures around the children and young people strategy that are in place. We mentioned the cross-departmental working group that we have in place, and really a lot of the work on that through the policy development has been trying to better understand the level of investment that goes in from different departments into youth services. So in a lot of cases, there's a lot of similarity there.
Around about 200 million.
Do you know what it is by different, the breakdown?
So I mean, EU services in itself is about £38 million. 14, the community one sector grant schemes that we talk about is about 14 million. The rest is other things. Some of it is funded from the EU for us to deliver service directly. But for example, we have significant funding from the Department of Justice. We have joint working with Department of Health. We have funding from the Executive Office to deliver different programs. So there are a lot of cooperative cross-government to deliver youth services. And that's, I mean, that's not impacted by this decision talking about here, because that's ongoing funding streams or ongoing projects. And it's important to note that it isn't just about the community involvement sector. It's much more to youth services than that pot. It's a very important part, but it's not the only part of youth services.
So just, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've just heard actually an evidence session of just how important youth services can be in terms of educational outcomes, and that's what all this has to be about at the end of the day. And if there's mechanisms there, such as a piece of legislation that can facilitate pooling of resources, which it's intended to do to safeguard these services, it would be comforting to know that that is something that's being actively utilised.
One of the themes of the new policy is around partnership, and we do believe that there's more mileage in improving the partnership that's there across government, across working with our community involvement sector, across local councils as well. I think those are things that can be pursued further, and that'll be one of the themes that's outlined in our draft policy.
The other, again, this is based on feedback that I've been listening to. So there was a concern around a move towards commissioning of youth services, so moving away from the grant aid system, and that might have the effect of some of the smaller providers not being able to compete in that process. Can you comment on that? Tell us what the direction of travel is in terms of commissioning.
At this stage, the focus is really on the policy, the new policy then going forward, and then we will work with our EA partners to look at how do we best implement that. So what does the model look like underneath that? Is that still a grant aid type model? Is it commissioning? Is it a mix of those? And each of those has pros and cons, I suppose, of actually what business model is employed. So there's been no firm decisions on that, but that will be one that we'll work our way through.
Outcomes again, it seems like that model when applied in England kind of dismantled the system quite a bit over there, and that can't be good for outcomes. So will that factor into your kind of evaluation of that?
I mean, I think however we implement any new policies, we will always see what other jurisdictions have done and what hasn't worked. We should not do the same what they've done. In the same way where things have worked in other jurisdictions, let's take successes. I mean, grant schemes have great opportunities, and it can be really powerful. Commissioning can also be really powerful. It depends on what we want the system to look like. And I mean, that's a slightly different question. Yeah. And I think it's probably premature to talk about it before consultations happened. If you know what the policy direction is, then we can see what system should we have to best meet whatever policy direction there is. I mean, the current issue with funding is a result of grant schemes. If I had a commissioning model, the current issue wouldn't exist, right? The current funding issue, because it's continuation of service, and that's one of the risks of grant schemes. So there are pros and cons with both kinds of doing things. And I mean, we will always implement policy. That's our job in EA, but we will set out the pros and cons when it comes to those implementation of whatever policy outcomes there are eventually.
And just finally, in terms of that policy direction, again, just as a general theme, a concern that has been underlying a lot of stuff going on in the department is that there's consultations, but things have been predetermined. Are you really listening to people through this consultation process, or will this be another just tick, we've consulted, but we're just going to do what we plan to do anyway?
No, very much so. You know, the process started, and I must say I inherited it and came along with the journey. The process that was already set up was one that very much started with young people at the centre, and started with a blank sheet of paper around actually looking at the current policy, looking at lessons from elsewhere, and looking at what the purpose of youth work is, and really getting that sense from everybody that was engaged through the process about what the key issues were and what the future direction should be. So whilst I think we'll have a pretty comprehensive direction of travel that we propose, we're very much keen to get any feedback through the consultation process too.
See how that goes. Thank you, appreciate it.
Michelle, so I have an indication from Cathy. I just have one other question that's kind of it's just filtering through the evidence here, just to make sure I'm clear in this in my mind. I mean, I'd asked initially about this new composite block grant. How confident are you that we're not in a scenario where you're forcing policy decisions around where investment should be targeted that really are departmental onto the operational arm of things, which is the EA? Because if we just say the department now has no role in saying how much money should go into youth services, and then the EA decides operationally how to make that most effective, I have a real concern we could see services being impacted, direct services being impacted to young people, and the accountability then sits with the EA because there was effectively carte blanche given from the department. Is there not a role for the minister to say, fundamentally at a policy level, this is what needs to go into youth services because I value them or I don't value them, whatever his answer might be.
The department can't absolve itself of its responsibility around this, and the minister I'm sure won't absolve himself of his responsibility to be accountable for all things in education. So we will still be there to make sure actually the legal duty is upheld, that the policy of the department is implemented, and we'll be working closely with our EA colleagues to deliver that, and we will want to make sure that we're seeing positive steps in it. It would be remiss of me if I suggested that we're in some sort of fairy tale land that budget won't have an impact. So that is a concern for me. That is a concern for me, regardless of where the budget decision sits with the department or with the Education Authority.
The amount of
but
resource
we will be there to push for the policy being delivered through the EAA and colleagues beyond that.
I do understand that. And look, there's not a single person around this table would say we live in a fantasy land where there is just indefinite money for whatever we fancy should be invested in education. But the budget you allocate to something is a policy decision, and you're putting that decision to the operational body. The department deals with policy, so why is there no leadership coming from the department to say this is what we consider to be an adequate budget to deliver youth, or even to say this is not an adequate budget because our budget is inadequate, but at least we're saying you're not going to go below this threshold because the department really makes a decision what an adequate service is, not the EA.
I don't think we'll be completely blind to that. Now, I'm not on the finance side of things, but I would be expecting that actually in passing the allocation over to the EA, the department will want to be cited in the decisions that are taken by the EA board in that, and we will want to assure ourselves that actually the EA board is going to be set up in order to deliver the department's policy direction.
Would you take this approach with special educational needs?
The approach would end up effectively being the same right across the suite of spend in education. That actually we're giving the EA the budget, but setting a clear direction about what is required by the department in exercising that budget. If that turns out that there's concern along that journey, the department will work with the EA to try to alleviate that.
Well, I'll leave it at there, but I would want to put very clearly my concern. I think these kind of budgetary decisions are policy decisions, and I think we're shifting responsibility to the wrong place. I have a real concern about that, but I'll bring Cathy in.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to clarify something on the back of Michelle's question around the Children's Services Cooperation Act. Did I mishear you, Andrew, with all due respect, saying that partnership is now a theme of the new policy?
Partnership is the theme of the existing policy, but it's also something that's highlighted in the policy going forward, yes.
So we're changing policy and then we're going to look at partnership rather than before we change policy. And if we're talking about budgetary, like we had a presentation from the Department of Finance last week in Communities. Department of Finance has went to every single department asking them, please come forward with ideas for the Children's Services Cooperation Act on how we can pull resources. Are you seriously saying that this is not being explored? That we're just going to cut these services rather than look at all options? You're talking about fairy tale land. Like, am I in a fairy tale land that the Minister hasn't considered this?
No, this certainly is. There's partnership already ongoing at the moment.
There's a difference between partnership and the Children's Services Cooperation Act in actually pulling resources. Has this not been explored? Judging by your answer to Michelle, it doesn't seem to have been. It's
explored certainly through the development of the policy, where we've had the cross-departmental group, and certainly one of our recommendations is that actually we keep that group continuing going forward on this. Whether it's been explored specifically under the guise of the legislation that's there, I don't know. I need to come back to you on that one.
But we're making decisions to, like, this is going to impact directly our children and young people. It's going to impact our EA staff. We're talking about they're not going to lose jobs, but these are projects like Flare that is directly impacting the mental health of our young people. And we're not going to look at the Children's Service Cooperation Act. We're going to look at it as a theme in a new policy. It just beggars belief to me.
We'll certainly be looking at utilising those structures. The legislation should be there to use those powers really as a last resort if organisations aren't working well together.
It hasn't been used here as a last resort. We're going to change the policy and then we're going to look at partnership after it rather than looking at it before this.
No, Chair, just to clarify the intent that I had, that was clarifying there is partnership. There is money that comes from different departments already, and Tomas has touched on some of those already. Do I think that is we've maximised the opportunities for efficiency and for partnership working? No, I don't, and that's why that's a theme going forward that we can build on what's already there. So I don't want to misrepresent that as saying there isn't effective partnership already. I'm saying that can be built upon further going forward.
Okay, I'm still not really convinced, but okay.
Thank you, Kathy. Waiting for further indications. Don't know if there are any. Peter? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Chair, and thank you for coming along this afternoon. I want to just go all the way back to budget, which is really where we started with. I mean, how challenging is the draft budget for the department, and is this going to impact on the level of support in terms of youth work and youth service?
Chair, it's extremely challenging. I think the Minister's on record as outlining the impact that has and the particular intricacies in education in terms of the high proportion of spend on staff, and then the lack of control that brings with it. It brings risk across all education services. So I can't hand on heart say that youth services would be spared from that. It's risk right across the board, and that does concern me, because as I've outlined at the start, youth services do make a real impact on the lives of our children and young people.
Okay. And as far as I'm aware, the multi-year budget, John O'Dowd, who brought it forward to the executive, hasn't been agreed yet, but I've just looked up here and the gap is about 800 million for 26-27. Does that figure sound about right to you?
In that region, yeah.
Yeah, okay. We've talked quite a bit, and I certainly see where the Chair was going with the sort of line of questioning. In terms of this change in how funding is delivered and the I suppose you call it the removing of the ring fence. I mean, there may be another term for it, I'm not sure, but that's probably my understanding of it, and that the EA would make some decisions around this. Would you say Danny described it as reckless for political gain, and that in doing so youth work had become a political football? Would that be your understanding of the reasoning or motivations behind this change?
My understanding of it is looking at financial governance overall, and rather than the department making decisions in slicing the cake in different ways, it's more moving into a position of clarifying the ask of the EA, passing the budget over, and moving in a position of holding to account for delivery against that.
Okay.
Passing the buck.
And who eventually will sign this off in terms of the EA allocation? Who decides to say yes or no to it in terms of how the EA decides how this pot might be spent? Is that a director, or is that a chief executive? Who eventually signs it off?
It's an internal budget discussion in EA. So when we have the indicate budget, or we have the actual budget, we will determine how that meets our needs. Mm-hmm. And I mean, my projections is about 150 million pound overspend in my area alone, right? So that's a challenge for me. Ultimately, when it comes to new spend, so the community of one sector grant, because it's a new grant scheme starting this year, that would have to be decided by the EA board.
Right. So the EA board would eventually sign this off?
Yeah, they would have to decide on the spend for youth services. Yeah.
Am I right, Thomas, that the board is comprised of a whole range of people, but it also is fairly reflective of all political parties? So all reps, for example, on this committee, there would be some reflection of that membership on the EA board, is that right?
Oh, it's the political appointees on the board, yes.
Right. Okay. That's useful to know in terms of what the final decisions will be around this, so no more questions from me, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. And David, did you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm going to take it a slightly different direction, and that's probably more parochial and related to issues on the ground, not in East Belfast, I have to say, but nevertheless the organisations that have come to me with some issues. First of all, can I ask, as part of the restructuring of the services, if you can outline the logic for removing a youth worker from Beaver Youth Centre in South Belfast? I think that's something that's causing a great concern in that community. Last time the youth worker was removed, the youth worker in question, attendance at the centre dropped significantly. It's an organisation that whilst not in my constituency, I've engaged with up here when they've done visits and so on. It's clear to see the connection between young people and their youth worker. Can I ask you to lay out the logic for that, and whether you're taking into consideration the drop in engagement that happened whenever it was previously removed?
I'm sure Olin can provide details, but I just want to say one thing about youth work, both service we do in. It's quite a large number of youth workers that we fund either directly or indirectly. And I mean, all the discussion we're having here, I just want to be clear that the youth workers on the ground that delivering youth services, I mean, the work they do is fantastic across all sectors, across all communities. I just want to make that very clear, because we sound quite negative about youth work in here sometimes, and the decision making, that this is not about the individual people. So I just want to make that very clear.
Can I just
the question,
No,
and I'm not saying anyone here said that, but I just want to highlight that.
I wanted just to come in and just the clerk had just again flagged for me as again we're possibly getting into a realm where one individual staff member might be being discussed here in an open session of committee, and it's just to, again, if there are HR issues or contractual issues that aren't appropriate to discuss in this open session, can of course go back to David. I accept your quite fine. I want to identify that it's one individual we're talking about here. We do need to be mindful of that. But just for you to decide how it's appropriate to answer.
And Arlene, I mean, I just want to say one thing about when we talk about restructuring of youth services, which has been, I know there's been some noise about. There's an internal restructuring in the corporate areas of youth services, but it's corporate stuff, not front-facing delivery stuff. And let's create better, more efficient structures of essentially my corporate headquarter staff. So that's not the same. That's not the structure of youth service delivery of youth services delivered on the front line, so to speak. So I just want to make sure that we don't conflate those two messages. By restructuring corporately, we create efficiencies and better decision making. That's really good work. Arlene can ask about specific things if we can.
David, happy to link with you after this personally, but just to say, declaration of interest, it's the area where I've lived for a period of time and very, very familiar with. Beaver Youth Centre is a statutory EA youth service provision, and we haven't removed a youth worker there. There is a youth worker there, and we have no intention of removing youth services from Beaver. It is really an important centre.
Are you aware of concerns around that?
It's I'm aware that there are temporary contracts which wouldn't be helpful for us to go into today, but we will not be removing youth services from Beaver. The youth centre is joined to the local primary school. It's very well maximised. It is an area that we have a lot to achieve in terms of good relations and in terms of outdoor learning, in terms of the personal social development with young people. I'm in Beaver Youth Centre, and it's a very vibrant centre that we have had a lot of activity going on for young people, and there is no risk to Beaver Youth Centre closing.
Well, appreciate that clarity. Thank you very much for that. I've one other issue which doesn't relate to any staff members. The chair will be glad to know, but it's to ask for if there's any update on the current plan for the proposed co-location of Monkstown Boxing Club with the school. And how that's progressing. I believe the club has been engaged with you over a matter of over the last year, and there has been engagement, but I believe that some of the correspondence they feel has not been responded to recently. So just an update on that if possible.
Not one I'm aware of, Chair, but we can check that out and come back.
Come back to me. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Don't think there's any other indications. I suppose I would just maybe like to finish with a comment. I'm slightly concerned that the discussion is leading towards, well, this is all ultimately the EA board's responsibility, and because there's political representation, well, then that's where accountability sits. I think we need to be really clear that responsibility sits with the minister, and we may well have political appointees on the EA board, but if the minister doesn't set a clear policy direction of travel about what is the prioritisation for youth services, I don't think that's an acceptable position to land in. And I think we need to be clear. The education budget's bigger than schools, and it would be really concerning if an attempt to move that accountability away, that we saw any reduction in service for young people and communities that really rely on these services. There is no magic money tree. I'm not talking about how much money, I'm talking about accountability. And I think we need to be really, really clear about that and where in this context that appropriately sits. That's a comment from me at this stage. Agreed. Agreed. Final point, as we don't have any other questions indicated, I just wanted to ask for very, very brief clarification, maybe from yourself, Arlene, just around those two projects that have moved into a different structure, Caddy and Flare. Just declare interest. I'm the parent of a young person who went through Caddy. Probably highly likely to be part of the reason why they're at university studying filmmaking now. It's an absolutely brilliant service, but I'm not here to lobby on the Caddy service. I just think that interest should be declared. But there is a sense that there is a change in the structure there, and there is some concern around, particularly around Flare, potentially saying that those services coming to an end in some form. Can you give us a sense of what the future looks like for those two services?
Yes, so first of all, Caddy is staying and is very much part of our structure, and we work in partnership with the Nerve Centre, and we seek to gain funding from a range of sources to make sure that project continues to work very effectively with children and young people. Flare is part of the Emotional Health and Wellbeing Framework, and started off being part funded by PHA. That funding was mainstreamed. More recently, it has been funded through Youth Service. The position of Youth Service and the Emotional Health and Wellbeing Framework is very clear. We are about the well-being of all. We are about capacity building. We've undertaken a process of making sure that all youth workers are able to support children and young people in the Emotional Health and Wellbeing Framework. Flare staff are youth workers with a focus on emotional health and wellbeing. They're not experts, they're youth workers. Nobody's losing a job. The brand, in a sense, will be gone, but every youth worker will be in a position now where they can provide the emotional health and wellbeing support to our young people. We also, as part of our policy, have to be very aware that where there are other people providing services we can't duplicate. So we're very aware of all the multi-millions that have gone into Peace Plus on emotional health and wellbeing. We're very aware that the community and voluntary sector have some excellent projects working in that space. So as part of our regional youth development plan, we are very much about protecting frontline youth services. So our youth workers who were in the Flare team have been engaged in a process of making sure that everybody in youth service can support the emotional health and wellbeing of our young people at an access for all level, and all of those youth workers will be frontline youth workers in their local communities, which is where we've always been. So it was a very bespoke project for a period of time that was funded directly by PHA, then mainstreamed, and now is being completely mainstreamed right throughout youth services.
We just have to wait and see how that change filters through. I mean, obviously, I think that the Flare project was very much valued, and that emotional health and wellbeing bit is obviously crucial to really everything youth services does. So we'll certainly keep an eye on that. Okay, well, thank you all for your time on that session today, and we will certainly be keen to engage once the consultation goes out on that policy direction. Yep, certainly, Danny.
Yeah. I suppose I'll start off with saying, Peter's not here, but I actually feel like he vindicated me, or like validated everything I was saying in his questioning. So I was really glad. I was going to thank him wherever he's away. That sort of doesn't feel completely right to me, all of it, even just the setup. Or I think that should have been two presentations, maybe one from the department and then from the EA themselves, because too much, as you said it yourself, emphasis was then gone on to the EA board, and I genuinely hold my hands up, don't know how that works. Do they get things presented to them and they note that, or they say, well, this is being funded at? Just don't think it's fair whatsoever, and that's what I felt like this is going to be. I still believe this is a political football that was created over the multi-year budget. It only just happened overnight. That's what it felt like to youth workers, and that's what they were saying to me. And just in the questionnaire, I actually felt it just didn't feel right. Just doesn't feel right at all to me, and it's really worrying.
Definitely, I would share concerns. Just a separation of sort of that you can't separate policy and budget. You set the direction of travel with your policy, with your budget would be my feeling. But is there anything we particularly want to raise? I did note Andrew was taking notes, I think, at the end there of some of the feedback from committee. Unless there's anything specific we want to raise, I suppose we are waiting for that consultation now is the next step.
Yeah, but can we feel as a committee? I know they say there's people on the board who represent political parties and all, but it would be interesting to know what would that mean for them, because it should be the minister 100%, but it happens a lot in here where the board is mentioned, and we never really know or understand exactly what it is that they say, because it happened one time, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was almost like the board made the decision. It actually wasn't. It was just it was noted, but by the time we found that out, it was already off the agenda, if you know what I mean. And the minister done it himself in the chamber.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the specific question might be. I suppose we all have our own internal channels, to explore some of those things with. But obviously, EA board members, ultimately, my understanding on any board is that your responsibility is to that corporate organisation, and it's, I think it's to sort of say that there's a political accountability, in terms of the very, very top level decisions being taken there. There's grey areas in the mix. So I don't know if there's I
don't know if they could ever come in. The chair or a couple of members of a committee explain, like, I'm sure they're worried here and that.
A lot of EA board conversations are confidential and not for public sharing, and they can't be shared beyond board members. So I'm not sure necessarily how we would pursue that. But okay, we'll move on then to the next item in the agenda, which is correspondence, if we're agreed. So correspondence. As ordinarily is the approach, you'll have in your packs a summary note, which is provided for you at page 150 of tabled papers, and I'll run through anything that requires a committee decision or discussion. Other than that, it will be as per the summary note. So item 8.2 on page 152 is correspondence from Playboard NI asking to brief the committee on its report Why Play Matters in Primary School. So look, this would be an area that my instinct would be I would really love to hear from Playboard on this, and I think this is a really key issue at school level. But I am also aware we have pressure around our legislative programme, and that could make capacity quite tight. Do members have a view on whether we would be seeking a briefing on this, Cathy?
Yeah, Chair, I think it would be actually really useful, not just for that, but also with the childcare strategy, because Playboard plays such a huge role in that. And obviously their focus around school age childcare within that, I think it would be really useful to hear from them on both those kind of spheres.
I would endorse that.
Yeah, I'm going to echo that. So I suppose there's two ways to approach it. I was speaking with the clerk earlier, and it was to get a sense whether or not there is an interest in perhaps, and this came up in the earlier session as well, around one of our stakeholder type events focusing around some of these issues. I know this is primary school. I don't want to say play is limited to early years. It's not the space I'm in at all. But whether there is maybe an early years stakeholder event that we could look at to bring some of these strands together. But I'm certainly content if members are agreed on this particular one to seek a briefing. I think it will link into the childcare briefing we're going to receive next week, so we're agreed on that. Agreed. Okay. Item 8.3, page 154. It's a response from the Minister of Education on safeguarding children with allergies. So I would propose that we share the response with the correspondent that raised the issue through the Benedict's Law campaign. I would have some concern that perhaps what we have in there doesn't go far enough. There's no sense of any interest in legislative change to address some of these issues, but we can certainly invite feedback from the correspondent if we're agreed. Agreed. Item 8.4, page 156. It's a response from the Minister of Education on the accuracy of attendance and absence recording in schools. Are members content to share the response with the correspondent that had raised that issue with us? Are we agreed? Agreed. Item 8.5, page 158. It's a response from the Commissioner for Public Appointments on the role of the Commissioner in relation to the GTC bill. Are we content to add the response to the papers for the bill? Is that agreed? Agreed. Item 8.7, page 169, correspondence from the EA suggesting dates for the proposed visit to its Belfast office to see a demonstration of the digital statementing system. Can I ask members to link in with the clerk directly to confirm, first of all, interest in attending, and secondly, those dates if they suit? Unfortunately, I don't think any of those dates are going to suit me, so if I'm going to be there, I'll need to maybe move it on a little bit, but if members could link in with the clerk, are we content with that as an action for now? Agreed. Item 8.8, page 170, it's correspondence from an individual regarding the SEN specialist provision at St Paul's High School in Bestbrook. So just seek members' views on this. I would want to suggest we should certainly be adding this to the SEN inquiry papers, as I think it speaks to some of that interaction with the school estate and specialist provisions. But I think this feels like quite an urgent, pressing issue for the school, and I would want to suggest that we would probably need to get urgent correspondence away to both EA and Minister as to how they will address those accommodation needs which seem to be pressing and immediate, unless there's any other actions. Are we agreed?
No other actions, but I think it's worth pointing out that this is the heart of the issue in terms of schools' hesitancy to take on specialist provision, that the promise that this will be all taken care of and all the resources will be made available, and here's an example where that's not happening. So I just think it's worth just making that point, and not to put people off engaging with the process, but it's just to reinforce why there's a hesitancy from schools and a reluctance, because that's not something they're just not getting involved with. They've real examples of where they have a right to be fearful.
Absolutely, and I think it is. I think we should be putting that into our inquiry evidence, because I think that should inform recommendations coming out of that, particularly around SPIM. So, are we agreed on those actions?
Yeah, the question would be kind of systemic rather than specific to the school, as far as possible, anyway.
I would be keen to get a response in terms of what even to encourage engagement directly with the school, because it seems that they need that fairly urgently. Item 8.9 on page 172, it's just to highlight that the correspondent on that issue has been in touch to request that be rescinded, as they've identified it's an emerging issue and potentially will be in touch again in the future, so it's just to note. Item 8.10, page 192, it's correspondence from Ofcom, and it's call for action from social media firms to protect children. So happy to hear members' views on that. I mean, I would suggest in terms of workload pressures, I'm not sure we would have capacity to hear evidence on that directly, unless other members have a view. But there are potentially APGs which may have an interest in this issue, who might want to pick some of that up. But are there any other actions aside from noting at this stage? Read a note. Item 8.11, page 193, it's correspondence from Dr. Aisling Hylands providing a policy brief on early years workforce support policy. And again, I think with the early learning and childcare strategy brief, which is coming up next week, I think perhaps after that meeting that may be an opportunity to scope out if there is interest in an early years stakeholder meeting, and I would certainly be keen to invite Dr. Hylands to that if that was an opportunity, if we're agreed. Great. Other than that, are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 150 with those exceptions? Agreed. Okay, item 9 is forward work programme, and that's a draft programme is available for you in your packs at page 263. I'll invite the clerk to speak to it, but and then if members have anything that they want to add, is there anything particular to highlight?
Yeah, just during the meeting actually, it emerged that the British Heart Foundation and SIA post-legislative update on the work, the curriculum work on CPD in schools, where young people learn life-saving skills that we haven't got that finally scheduled after all. So I've basically arranged to have the RE researchers present on the 15th of April. And then there's quite a bit of bill business that day as well. So yeah, that'll keep that quite a busy meeting anyway. And there is a lot of just bill business kind of on stream there, but it's mostly represented in the forward work plan, where you can see the 2 private members' bills are going to have their second stage on the 13th and 14th of April, so they'll be starting committee stage on the 15th.
Mark, could I just ask you about that? Yeah. My understanding is the committee stage can begin the day after second stage.
Yes.
Is there any reason, therefore, that we can't come in on the 15th, the committee stage start?
You could also come in on the You could also come in on the 15th. You mean both of you to introduce? Yeah.
Would it not be normal process to move to consultation at that stage before evidence comes in? Would that not be normal process?
One of the first things that happens is that the bill sponsors come and present their idea and the reason for drafting in the way that they have. What I was going to say is that I had actually thought we might be able to start a citizen space before recess, but we have to wait till the second stage happens. But yeah, if you were ready, you can come back and confirm with me if you like, that you have whoever's going to come in with you and that you're ready to go on the 15th. Yeah. We can hear from you, in that space, if everybody's content.
I think the legislative timetable is going to be incredibly busy, so where there is space in the programme to move through those processes, we should be taking that, yeah. We're agreed? Okay. Anything else to add on that?
And so no, we just there's a lot of legislative work. Victoria Graff's virtual visit then is in on the 20th of May, and you're coming up towards the end of your committee stage for GTC as well. So and the SEN inquiry, I think the departmental evidence will complete on the 29th of April, so that would allow you to do a stock take then on SEN and see what else you might need, or whether you just want to start collating all of that at that point.
Okay, just with those additions, is there anything else to add, or are we content to endorse the forward work programme as drafted? Great. Okay. That takes us to item 10, which is any other business. Do we have any other business? No. Okay, item 11 then is date, time and place of next meeting. So that will be next Wednesday, the 25th of March, 2 p.m, back in room 29 and online. And I will put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Committee room 30, sound.